Good evening, everyone. Thank you. It's Monday, March 18th, 2024. It's 6:03 and counting on that big clock on the wall. This is the Weston Board of Education regular meeting. The first item on the agenda is a call to order and a verification of a quorum, which we have. The second item on the agenda is a Pledge of Allegiance. If we could all stand. Hopefully this is the start of spring. Seems very nice outside. We're winding down towards the end of the school year, which is probably a very exciting time for those of you at the end of the desk down there. You can tell us about that. Some of us had the opportunity this past week to participate in the Portrait of a Graduate, which was a real experience. I saw Sharon there. It was great. I think that's just the best way to describe it. It's just a really uplifting opportunity to do that. The third item on the agenda is approval of the minutes. These are the meeting minutes from the February 12th, 2024 Board of Education regular meeting. Are there any changes that anyone sees or would like? Hey, Michael. Seeing none, may I have a motion to approve the minutes from the February 12th, 2024 Board of Education regular meeting? Is there a second? All those in favor? Aye. The next are the meeting minutes from the February 20th, 2024 Board of Education special meeting. Any changes to those minutes? A motion to approve? Second? You guys are doing well. All those in favor? Okay, there you go. Aye. Moving on, the next item on the agenda is the Student Board of Education representative comments.
Hi, I'm Gianna from the high school. So there have been a few things going on at the high school. The first thing was our Super Bowl pep rally, which we hosted last week. Along with that, we had a food drive where we had over 700 items donated, and all of these donations go to Person to Person. We had Miss Garone, who's a representative from Person to Person, come speak to us at the pep rally, which was really inspiring and great stories to hear. Next up, we have some senior updates. First off was our Portrait of Graduate, which you just mentioned. It was a great opportunity for us to have a 10-minute session with faculty members and talk about our experiences in high school and how that translates to what we're going to do out of high school. We also have the beginning of our internship coming up May 17th, and also on May 17th is our junior and senior prom, so super excited for that. Next, our sustainability class is raising money for a pollinator garden in one of our empty courtyards. It's something that, as a member of the sustainability class, we've been working really hard to put forth for everyone, and it's a really exciting project. And also next, to talk about some sports, our winter sports concluded, and now we're moving on to the spring season. We had a pretty decent, successful season. Boys swim won state championships, and boys ski team also won state championships. And lastly, we have our school play coming up that's starting this Thursday, and it goes all the way through Sunday. So I'm definitely going to go, and I encourage any of you guys, if you have some free time, to stop by.
Terrific. Any questions? Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Aziz, I'd like to make a comment now before the public comment.
Sure.
If you notice in front of you, Board of Ed members, you have a little token of our appreciation. It is Board of Education, National Board of Education Volunteer Month, and we certainly want to extend our thanks, the school district, on behalf of the administrative team, the faculty and staff. This job is a great commitment. a big commitment on your personal time. It takes time away from, I know, your families. I remember when Melissa Walker was honored last month, I was thinking about that, all the times where she was here and not, maybe watching Will run or Ally participating in sports. Each and every one of you have that same situation, and you give of your time and your effort away from your own families. So on behalf of the administrative team and the WPS staff, I would like to take a moment to recognize you, as well as our Board of Education clerk, Ms. Saketa. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Try to keep it alive.
It's a succulent, so
Oh, okay.
I think we're good.
Yeah, there we go. So before we go into public comment, at the recommendation of the Board of Education Communications Committee, they have devised a roadmap, and so the public knows what public comment is and what we can and cannot do. And we will be reading this before public comment in every meeting, and it's also included in the minutes. The board welcomes the opportunity to hear from members of the public about matters concerning the Weston Public Schools. Public comment is an important chance for the board to receive input and feedback from our school community. We listen attentively to all comments shared. While we value and pay close attention to public comment, it's our practice not to respond substantially or somewhat at all during public comment. There are several reasons for this. First, engaging in a discussion on non-agenda items could violate the board's obligations to comply with the Freedom of Information Act. Second, the board or the administration may not be prepared to discuss certain matters raised in the first instance by a public comment. Third, the board develops its meeting agenda carefully to ensure that the board addresses matters that are pressing or relevant at the time of the meeting. We encourage members of the public with specific questions, concerns, or complaints about our schools to reach out directly to Superintendent Barbario. You may also email the board at our email address, which is Board of Education, all one word, at westonps.org. And there are additional details on public comment at board meetings can be found on our website, and meeting conduct are covered by the bylaws of the Board of Education book, and it's bylaw 9325. And unless it goes on to the second page, which it doesn't, I'd like to take public comment.
I'm just going to ask you to state your name and your street address, please.
It's over here, don't worry.
That's okay, and the meeting code of conduct is on the table for if you have any
I don't need
need
that.
for it.
You'll understand why. Good evening. I'm Lynn Kimberly. I live at 3 Broad Street. My family moved to Weston in 1968. I'm a graduate of Weston High School. I'm a former teacher and athletic coach in Weston. My husband and I chose to buy a home here 30 years ago. We raised our 2 daughters here, and they're Weston High School graduates as well. My public comment is about in-person meetings. I know to some this may be a hot or politically charged topic. To me, it is not. As a former Weston Board of Education member, I believe open and in-person meetings are very important. I remember a similar discussion we had in the past about whether or not our meetings, then held in the Weston Public Library Community Room, would be televised or not. And it was a very hot, contested conversation about that. This seems very similar to me. I'm a proponent of in-person meetings because they're spontaneous and make it easier for people to communicate through body language and facial expressions, which many times are lost in virtual meetings. I get it, virtual meetings offer lots of flexibility. Our national, state, and local government holds meetings in person. There's no longer any medical reason, i.e. COVID, for not meeting in person. If you look up the reasons for holding in-person meetings, you can Google it everywhere. There's a long laundry list. In-person meetings foster and build stronger relationships, loyalty and trust, keeps the group focused and productive, renders more effective communications, and better able to communicate clear goals, and participants are less distracted. I'm sure there are even more positive reasons I'm sure there are even more positive reasons for in-person meetings. I believe the best case scenario is Board of Ed meetings being in person, and worst case scenario, the compromise should be hybrid meetings, not virtual meetings only. I've spoken with many residents whom feel the same way I do. Please vote for in-person meetings, and if necessary, with a hybrid option for Board of Ed members or members who sit around this table who are either traveling, sick, or for some other reason cannot be present. And I also hear that a lot of people say there's nobody there. I've sat at many of these meetings where no one sits there. Thank you for your time and consideration. This is a very important matter, and I hope you'll seriously consider what I've said here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Please state your name, your address, and you'll have 5 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Ethan Blinder. I live at 42 Greenlee Lane. You may recognize me. I was here just at the last board meeting. And I know that on the agenda for today is a discussion around the existing policies of cell phone and personal electronic device usage in our schools. And I want to start off by saying thank you for putting this on the agenda. I really do appreciate that you will be having this discussion around whether the existing policies are sufficient and whether or not it makes sense to change the policies regarding cell phone usage in our schools. So I'm not going to harp on what I said at the last meeting, nor what I said in my email. I don't want to bore anyone. If anything, I was hoping just to offer a little bit of anecdotal advice from a non-expert like myself on policy writing. You all may be familiar with the saying, "Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good." And in my background as an attorney, in trying negotiating perfect provisions in a contract, we often land on very complex provisions in a contract. And complexity leads to gray area, and it also leads to difficulty in enforcement, which something along the lines of enforcement is very important when determining whether a policy is good or not, especially as it relates to our administrators who are then tasked with enforcing said policies. So while nuance is always important, especially when it comes to our older children in the high school and usage around cell phones, unfortunately nuance can be difficult to put into a policy. And therefore it is my humble, non-expert opinion that perhaps simplicity be key. And in this particular scenario, simplicity being a ban on cell phones in our schools in their entirety, which leads to easier enforcement and consistency for both our administrators and our students, and protecting our students from the negatives and downsides of the smart devices and social media. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else that would like to speak? Thank you. Please state your name, your street address.
My name is Kimberly Mullen, or Foster. I live at 19 Spring Valley Road. Ladies and gentlemen, as I said, my name is Kimberly Mullen. I live at 19 Spring Valley Road, and I ask you to stay with me for about the next 5 minutes. Is kind of what this time's out to be. I've lived in Weston now for 6 years. We knew immediately that Weston was the perfect community in which to raise our son, and now our dog too. Our son is a second grader at Hurlbut Elementary. He loves it. I serve on the executive board of Hurlbut Elementary School's PTO, as well as other PTO committees and volunteer opportunities within the school. I am so grateful for this incredible community, all of our businesses, our schools, teachers, and my friends as well. My son is my everything, and I love him more than any words could ever express. And I'm sure most parents, pretty much all of you, could relate to this. My son, in tandem with my background, is the reason why I'm here this evening regarding security. In addition to being a mother, I'm an entrepreneur, a writer, artist, foreign policy expert, particularly around the nexus of transnational security, transformative technology, and society. I have a Master's of Science degree focusing on transnational security from NYU, and I have over a decade of professional experience working with some of the world's best in security, legal, and related fields at our highest and lowest ranking officials, local, state, federal, and international. My background has instilled in me a heightened awareness of the importance of protecting our most precious, important, and even most vulnerable, and in this case, that's our children. Now as a parent, every day, whether it's dropping my son off at school or entering after-school activities into the dismissal manager, I am reminded of the necessity to ensure safety measures are in place. Here in Weston, I have found extensive discussions focused only on physical security and perimeter defenses, like arming our security professionals, ensuring our entrances and sidewalks are protected. And while these are crucial, focusing on physical only scratches the surface of what is needed. I have faith that Mr. Rios and his team are working on a long-term security plan, but I also know that we, the parents, need more transparency into this and the process. Without going into methods and means, we must understand and adopt a comprehensive, multi-pronged approach to security, one that encompasses physical, cyber, personnel, and the emotional well-being of our children. We need more than security theater. We need security goal setting, risk and threat management, action, and accountability. As a parent deeply invested in the safety and well-being of our child, I sit here before you this evening with a profound understanding of the critical role that security plays in our lives, particularly and unfortunately in this day and age. According to the U.S. News and World Report, in 2023, there was 346 school shooting incidents across our country, meaning the U.S. averaged almost one horrific incident every day. According to the K-12 database, there have been 54 this year alone, and it's only halfway through March. Sadly, there is more facing our schools. Schools are now being hacked and becoming the victims of cyber ransom attacks where information is being stolen or held hostage. Last year, just down the road, as some of you know, New Haven Public Schools had a $6 million attack. Minneapolis Public Schools was hit by what experts describe as one of the most devastating cyber attacks on our schools. Hackers stole district data, including files where our children and educators were identifiable, and then demanded the district pay a ransom for it. When the district officials refused, the hackers released the data for sale online. This included Social Security numbers, personnel information, health records, and school security details. This impacted over 105,000 people. Is Weston equipped to handle security matters of this nature? In today's world, education extends beyond traditional curriculum. It includes ensuring the safety and security of all of our children. Unfortunately, we live in an era where security has become an indispensable component of our educational journey, where safeguarding our children is as vital as teaching them algebra or history. This doesn't mean hyper-monitoring our children's every single movement, which can lead to other issues like anxiety. However, it does mean that we need to be smart and rational and define a best holistic security approach, where the who is as important as the what. We must ask ourselves the questions that get to the core of the multi-pronged approach. What is our security goal? What are our related sub-goals, benchmarks, accountability standards, and who is ultimately responsible? What is our risk and security threat picture, and who is managing it? What are our security policies, standards, and controls? What is our data privacy and information security plan? What is our cyber insurance policy, and who is responsible for that? Who is managing our external vendors that handle our data and financials? And are we ensuring that these people have security measures in place to handle this appropriately? What are our external relationships with law enforcement, intelligence, and elected officials at the local, state, and national levels, and even with other districts? Okay. Can I wrap up quickly?
Please.
Okay. It is our collective responsibility to address these and other security matters now rather than later. Today, I call upon all stakeholders in developing a comprehensive security strategy utilizing a multi-pronged, nonpartisan approach that prioritizes the safety and well-being of children. Yes, I know firsthand that security must be handled securely, but not completely in the shadows. Although we should not discuss means and methods here, presenting a high-level plan and obtaining the trust of our community is of absolute paramount. As we strive to provide a world-class, well-rounded education for our children, let us not forget that their safety and security are fundamental. Let's establish an educational atmosphere for our children that not only stimulates and appreciates them, fostering enjoyment and engagement, but also guarantees their safety and emotional well-being. This won't happen overnight, but it is essential. Together, let us ensure that Weston Public Schools are not only known as centers of academic excellence, which obviously they are, but also as protectors of all of our children. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Sure. We can take care of that? Okay.
Hi, just please state.
Yeah, my name is Eric Tyson. I'm a Weston resident, and I wanted to make a brief comment about doing in-person versus remote meetings. I think Lynn Kimberly, who is a former Board of Ed member who spoke earlier, gave an excellent summary of the major benefits of doing in-person meetings. I would also say to all of you that you're serving as role models in the community. And I think that you're sending the wrong message to the students and others in the community that it's okay to do solely remote meetings. And I understand this group, I believe, has done quarterly in-person meetings, which is better than none, but I think you do lose a lot by not having in-person meetings. I think it's fine for you to consider, for example, the staff. I would imagine, I was trying to think about this from the standpoint of staff members. I probably wouldn't want to hang out in person to do a meeting at 7 or 8 o'clock at night. I'd probably rather go home or do a remote meeting, and I think it's perfectly fine to consider issues like that. But people should be upfront about that and have a candid, open discussion about what the perceived benefits are of doing an in-person meeting rather than having that kind of be something that's discussed back channel. I would also say that the timing of these meetings at 6 o'clock, I don't believe historically they were at 6 o'clock. I think they used to be a little bit later. I don't think this is a good time of day for people to engage. I sense that some of the people sitting around this table feel that it's okay to continue to do remote meetings because people don't show up at your meetings. And you're probably looking at me saying, I haven't seen this guy at any meetings in recent years, so who is he to show up and say that we should be doing in-person meetings? Well, part of the problem is that you do it at a terrible time of day. And again, maybe there's a good reason to do that. Maybe it's better for staff to do it, and I'm not disregarding that, but there should be a candid and open discussion about it. And the fact of the matter is, COVID changed everything, which I think it was a mistake. I think you sent the wrong message to people in the community and to our children who are in the school system. My kids are grown, thankfully. They didn't have to live through COVID, but you sent the message to all the students in the schools that COVID was a horrible and dangerous thing and that they could die by going to school, which we now know was factually incorrect. You could have done a meeting in person in the spring and summer of March 2020 and not sat close to each other, or not shown up at a meeting when you were sick. And I think you would have been better role models by doing that. That's my opinion. I'm not being critical of, I understand people made all sorts of personal decisions, but I think the history here is important, and the history and the fact of the matter is that before COVID hit, you did meetings in person, correct? And now you don't. So I think we have to acknowledge that, and rather than just like, well, COVID changed everything, well, the pandemic's over. And I think you're sending the wrong message to students that it's okay to do things remotely. So I understand you guys are all busy, and maybe part of being a good role model for your family is to be better, make better use of your time. And so I guess I'm not fundamentally opposed to some people some of the time attending a meeting remotely, but I don't think that should be the default that people use. I think you do lose something by only doing meetings remotely, which I think Lynn touched on. Like, one of the things I wouldn't have noticed if I was attending this meeting remotely is how hot it is in here. You know, which is kind of funny, but as a taxpayer, I have to tell you, it's also very annoying. Okay, most of this month, the heat is off in my house, and I don't know what the thermostat. I mean, it must be like 75 degrees in here, and this is not the first school building that I've been in where, like, you go into town hall and it's also 75 degrees, and I think we all have a responsibility to all taxpayers in town, many of whom can't afford to continue to live here, especially as they get older and retire, to be thriftier with our use of money. So I'm glad that I came here and was able to observe it. That wasn't why I came here, and I'm not trying to be a jerk about it, but it's too hot in here. I don't think the temperature should be up this high in school buildings. I don't know what the right number is, but it seems awfully hot. So anyway, I do appreciate you, most of you, sitting around the table are volunteers and donating your time as a Board of Ed member, and I do appreciate that. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Tyson, I just didn't catch your street address.
That's because
May I have it?
it's not anyone's business what street I live on. I'm a Weston resident and taxpayer.
Would anyone else like to address the board?
I'm Chris Kimberly, 3 Broad Street, Weston. I was at the Speak Up, and I thought there was a response on the decline in enrollment that was disingenuous. In 2006, we were 2,610 students, and that's a rounding error to 450 students no longer in our schools. That's a rounding error to a fifth of our students. We haven't saved anything in the way of teacher counts or administrator counts since then. And I just find that appalling. Thank you.
My name is Brad Oren. I am an ophthalmologist and a resident of Weston now for 7 years. And I have nothing nasty to say. I'm truly sorry. I came to the board remotely about 2 months ago requesting a review of an article that I felt was factually ludicrous. My confidence in local government has been completely turned around by each and every person at this table, at these tables, not this table. The new first of all, I'd like to thank the ad hoc committee. I don't know who was on the ad hoc committee, but if there's anyone who was on it who is not here now, please thank them for me. The new article is not what I would have written, but it is factually correct. It is balanced. And it is important for our kids to be able to look into the issues that this addresses factually. Lastly, I am going to say that Lisa Barbiero is a very dangerous person, and I'm only going to say this jokingly. Please, for the record, put this down as only a joke, but following my thanking her deeply and her staff for their work, I asked whether or not there was anything else I could do for the Weston School District, which has been so good to me and so good to my children. And I didn't expect an answer, but I got one. The answer was, we need substitute teachers. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as of 2:30 p.m. today, you're looking at your latest substitute teacher. Thank you again.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to make a public comment? Great. Well, thanks, everybody. Let's move on to old business. All right. It's the second read of the Weston Board of Education policies and regulations and bylaws. It's a discussion. This is a health assessment, Tina?
What we're going to review is, yes, the health assessment,
okay.
screening, and oral assessments. It's old business because it had been discussed before, and I'm going to actually, I know Tracy, you have sort of been a point person on this as someone that the nursing staff falls under Tracy. So I would raise the issue if anyone has any further questions on this. You've seen it before, and we're happy to entertain any answers. I believe a great deal of this is to mirror the, excuse me, the state law, correct?
Yes, we had talked about this policy last time. It's really to just update our policies to align with current state laws.
Questions, comments? Okay. Would someone like to make a motion to approve?
He's doing a great job.
Yeah.
Move that the Weston Board of Education approve the updates to AR 5141.3, health assessments, screenings, and oral assessments as presented.
Is there a second?
I second.
All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? The next item is a discussion regarding board response to public comment and email communication.
Yes, this is something that came out of the Communication Committee, and I would ask Mr. Felton to lead this discussion and give us a little bit of background.
All right, so for many of you who have seen since I joined the board, one of the things that I always thought from the outside looking in was the board stood stone cold poker faced when we would have public comment, and I never understood it. And I certainly thought it was disingenuous at minimum. So for the past, believe it or not, I'd say a better part of 2.5 years that 2.5 years? Yeah. That I've been on the board, I really sort of championed to figure out how can we be more engaged with the public, but not at the expense or within the guardrails that we have to operate in. So the Communication Committee worked pretty much in the past, I say 6 or 8 months, looking at where we wanted to be, limited by what we could do, whether it was by Connecticut state statute, FOIA requirements, or bylaws of the board. So we worked with the board's attorney, and basically we came up with a framework to start the public comment that Steve read beforehand. The intent there was to let the community know why we don't always, or why we don't generally engage in the back and forth. And the biggest takeaway for me, again, looking from the outside in, was that we have a requirement that things that we talk about are on the agenda. And if we start to engage in a conversation about things that aren't on the agenda, there's all kinds of rules. The wheels start falling off the bus, and we can get ourselves into a fair amount of trouble. Yeah, FOIA trouble for starters. So we sort of settled on the language that was read today, and hopefully if people have a chance, you can read it a little bit more yourself and just kind of understand where we're coming from. Then what we did was we looked at emails. The board does get emails from the community, and it's really frustrating at times as a board member, and I think we all agree. You get this email and you just want to respond, whether it's a virtual hug or I hear you or you're right, I agree with you. But the board policy is the chair of the board is generally the spokesperson for the board. And again, there's those guardrails that if we start responding individually, are we responding as an individual member of the community, or are we responding in our role as a Board of Ed member? So what we did in the Communications Committee was we worked with our attorney to sort of create some language that we as a board of 7 can use, so that when we receive an email from a community member, sometimes it goes to all of us, sometimes there's community members who, for whatever reason, align themselves with 1 or 2 of us on the board rather than the whole board. And then we feel, what do we do with this email? Do we just forward it to the chair and hope that the chair responds in a way that would be worthy of what we would respond, or can we respond in some way? So we created a sort of some boiler language that the communication committee is going to be asking the Board of Ed members to use as guidance when it comes to receiving emails. The intent is so that we have a uniform type of response. There's still some, what do you call it? It's still somewhat personal, but it's a templated response that we can acknowledge as an individual. We received the email, we're forwarding it to the chair, and so that you don't feel, the community doesn't feel like they hit the send button on the email and it just winds up someplace in the filter somewhere that no one ever looks at. So I think, in conclusion, we, the communications committee, I'm trying to find it, but we're asking the Board of Ed members to agree to use, wherever it is. Does anyone know where it is? It's in here someplace. Yeah, the email templates as essentially guidance when responding to the community. So no votes necessary. It's more just, this is what we're asking the 7 Board of Ed members to sort of follow as guidance.
And the templates in the agenda, so everyone can see what it is, and we'll be following that going forward.
Yeah, and the intent is, again, you can look through it. It's online. It's intended for the transparency of how we operate. That's sort of like that's the fine line, right, between us 7 board members, 7 different opinions, 7 of us, some of us with kids in the schools, some of us with not kids in the schools, trying to figure out how to connect with the community on a personal level, but operate within the guardrails of what we can do as Board of Ed members. So yeah, so hopefully for those of you who come in person, I know Eric is going to be coming to all of our meetings moving forward. And for those that email us, we can now individually respond without risking saying something we shouldn't have said.
Right.
And Phil, you'll be happy to know there's no cost associated with this.
Thanks, David. The next is the discussion regarding Board of Education meeting start times and remote or in-person meetings.
If I can just clarify a couple of things. There is something in your packet that was a chart that was requested by, I think it might have been you, David, right? To have some of the, the quantitative data regarding this. And I want to thank Mr. DeVito for preparing it. What I would say is we, certainly I, as your only employee, work at the pleasure of the board. So whatever happens, I will be here, whether it be in person or on Zoom, as will the staff. And the meetings, I believe, historically, because I was here when Lynn was on the board, I believe 7 o'clock. 6 and then 7, yes. So just for clarifying purposes, because many of you are all, we have a lot of new board members here that weren't even on the board pre-COVID, during COVID, everything. So it was 7, right, Lynn? Yeah. Okay.
I actually have something I want to say on this. Just to clarify, the reason, not that it shouldn't be revisited now, definitely, as we're doing now, but the reason why we as a group decided to go in hybrid was primarily based upon the numbers that were presented to us, showing that we actually had more participation or more people observing and watching the meetings when we were hybrid than when we were, or when we were online, when we were in person. Convenience, I don't know. We also understood and agree that it's important for in-person meetings too, so we tried to basically have, at least one a quarter. Sometimes it ended up being 2 a quarter, like we had one last month and now this month. But we try to do at least 1 a quarter and then do the others hybrid. Just, again, it had nothing to do with not being in person, and I don't disagree with the points that were raised tonight. Personally, I don't disagree with the points that were raised about in-person meetings. I think that they are wonderful. But I also know that we tend to reach more people when we are online. More people watch and have the ability to participate. If you can't make it here in person, you have no way of making public comment if we're in person all the time. And so that restricts some people's ability to be able to interact with us. So that was the whole reason why we went hybrid, was because we wanted to do a mix and get the best reach possible. That's the history of it, for those who weren't here, for those who were here, and for those who are observing tonight. It had nothing to do with any sort of lack of transparency. It really was increasing the reach as much as we possibly could for the meetings. Doesn't hurt to revisit, though.
Yeah, and actually, this will be an amazing meeting because Sharon and I have agreed on everything to date. There's still plenty of room for us to disagree. But Sharon, you're on communication with me and have been since the start, right? And that was another area that I was with communication committee trying to get us back to in-person meetings. And I'm the type of person, if you show me data, I can admit where I'm wrong, and I can say, oh, I hadn't thought about that. And when I, on the communication committee, first looked at why we're remote, I was pushing to get back into person for partially the reason that Eric brought up, which is that I felt very strongly we had to set the tone that the schools are safe to go back into. Then what we did was we looked, and I believe as Board of Ed, we looked at a couple of different things that were, I think, controlling factors. One was attendance, right? I think our number one goal should be attendance, and if not attendance, reach. And maybe those two things are similar. But how do we reach the largest part of our community? And without a doubt, it came down to virtual, being online. The parent who is stuck in traffic trying to get home from Stanford to Weston can participate in a meeting in their car on 95. Then we looked at, or we talked about things like the community has voted for the 7 Board of Ed members. If one of us travels extensively and can't make meetings, perhaps the person who you're most aligned with, they can't be there to advocate for issues that are important to you. So we looked at that as another reason. Then administration. To attract some of the best in 2024, you just have to have flexibility to include remote meetings. So I think ultimately when we looked at this from a communication committee, I remember sitting at one of our meetings, and Tony at the time was the chair, and we talked about how do we go back to, and what type of meetings do we go back to. And one of the things we talked about was I think the true hybrid type of meeting, which is an in-person meeting and people can participate remotely. And we looked at that. And I believe, Dan, the director of technology for the district, we asked him to look at what would it cost to properly outfit, whether it was this room or some other room in the district, so that people who were home could have the same experience as people who were sitting here. And that was across the board, whether it was the administration, Board of Ed members, or the community. And Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we wound up somewhere in the $70,000 to $80,000 range.
Yeah, it was a little bit over 60,000.
Right. And we just thought that, I always say every dollar we spend that doesn't go directly to educating our students is a dollar that we should really scrutinize. And I think that we thought $60,000 or $70,000, which we all know is just to get onto the dance floor, to spend that kind of money to outfit this room didn't make a lot of sense. So then we settled on this concept of hybrid, in-person meetings, and I think at the time we voted on it, it was agreed to a minimum of 1 in-person meeting per quarter, and I believe it was a vote, so it's somewhat binding, right?
I don't know how binding it was. I mean, it was a vote. We agreed to it.
Yeah. All right. Well, at least we agreed to at least 1 in-person meeting per calendar quarter, more if necessary, and we thought that was a good way to really appeal to the entire community, make ourselves available. So I think when you consider attendance, reach, the ability for all the Board of Ed members to participate, administrators to participate, I don't know that there's any real downside to continuing what we're doing. I don't think there's an upside to going all in person. I don't think there's a downside to what we're doing. Those are my feelings.
Yeah, just one more thing to add to that list. One of the other things we talked about last time was the best delivery method for the type of information we're presenting. So at times, if we're doing a recognition or if there's a big issue in the community and we feel like in-person dialogue is the best way, we tried to make sure that we either created an in-person meeting or scheduled that agenda item for an item that was online. But there are some meetings that are very text dense with presentations, and if you're in person and you're looking at the screen, it's easy to follow. But if you're following remotely, trying to watch the screen while the conversation is happening from a video feed, it was a little bit more difficult to follow. So having the Zoom meeting presentation for some of those more slide-heavy presentations made it a lot clearer in the delivery, and that was also a consideration we do when we decide what should go on what meeting and where it's located.
Yeah, actually, there are two other quick points I forgot to mention. Was that? Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. It's actually a third point, was that there's a cost associated with overtime for the support staff, not the administrators, not the principals or the folks here, but for Dan's team. But one of the things that we also talked about was, I lost my train of thought.
Sorry about that.
Thanks. What's that? No, we covered the overtime costs of support staff, but it'll come back to me. Oh, that was it, right. It was that, I think to Eric's point too, we did talk about the nonverbal communication. You can kind of see when you're talking to somebody in person, what do they look like? Like, when you kind of talk about different things. And we're aware that you don't get that on Zoom sometimes, but when we're on Zoom, just so people know, we see all of our faces. So for if you're on YouTube, I believe you just see the speaker, but if you are participating through Zoom, we can see the whole panel of everybody. So you can kind of see when people don't like what you're...
You can see when I'm rolling my eyes.
Yes, yes. So I think, that was at start time. I think maybe Lisa can talk about start time, because I think us as board members, right, we signed up to serve the community. I show up at 6 o'clock because that's when I'm told to show up. I don't know, from a start time perspective.
Forgive me, I knew it was at 7. It was moved to 6, I think in part, and this kind of predates me being here. I was over there at the other table. I think when it went on Zoom, it made, I could be wrong, started at 6. 6 or 7, as I said, will be here. The challenge sometimes with 7, and you often see me do it, even when we're at 6, when we get to the 3.5, 4 hour mark, what I try to do is I try to excuse the administrative staff because they've already gone and they have to be at school, high school, middle school open up, they have to be there at 7. But that's all I can offer along those lines. The meetings do go long, and so if we were going to, whatever time the meeting would start, I would still engage in that same practice to be respectful to the, usually it's the principals that are here. All of us, we get in early and on time. I don't want to admit that, act like we don't, but it's very early, having been sitting at that table. Once we're kind of done with our items and we go to committee reports and things like that, I just, we dismiss them because it can get very long.
How about if we were to try something a little different? And this is actually Bernie's recommendation. She and I had a conversation about this. Because I hear that a lot of people want to be able to participate in public comment if they can, and 6 o'clock is a really difficult time to get to the meeting, and 7 o'clock, I understand a lot of boards do start their meetings at 7 o'clock, but then of course, you're dealing with the 11 o'clock and later sometimes ending of a meeting, which is difficult for early starts in the morning. What about if we were to change somewhat some of the way that the meeting flows? So for example, have our various reports happen prior to the meeting starting. So each of, all the different, what we tend to have at the back of the meeting right now, which we can kind of go through relatively quickly, how about if we have that at the beginning of the meeting? And so we can push public comment later in the meeting before we have our presentation, but we can at least get some of the housekeeping out of the way. Aside from passing minutes, we can have the various, chair reports and things like that, and then maybe we could make it so that public comment is closer to the 7 o'clock start or maybe a 6:30 start as opposed to the 6 o'clock start. Just a thought. that we had discussed a little bit. Sorry, Bernie, didn't mean to throw you under the bus there. But just a thought, if, you know,
Can we
if,
start at 7? Like, I don't know if no one knows why we moved to 6, I think that,
What I recall is that it had to do with COVID and the Zoom meetings. I really don't remember any other strong reason, 6, and to be frank, I don't think it was any strong reason about overtime of a couple of people in the back, to be blunt. The custodian is here, so I don't want to, I think it had to do more with, well, it's Zoom, well, we'll start at 6, there's no travel time, people are home, let's just start. But, you know, as I said, to be frank, 6, 7, I've done them both. It's more about, you know, come around the 9 o'clock time.
I mean, from a professional perspective, I would prefer 7. I am white knuckling at times trying to get here till 6. I can get here, but I'm not sure if among other board members or from an administration perspective, I know I come back to Weston, right? So when I attend this meeting, I'm home. I'm indirectly home, right? I know for most of you, your day is over. You've worked the full day, so trying to meet in the middle, I don't know if a 7 o'clock start time would be preferred by Board of Ed members.
I don't want the board to base their decision on the ability of us to be here, the administrative team to be here at 7, to be perfectly frank. We serve the community, we serve the board. I was just making the point that if it was, whether it's 6 or 7, and I can let them go, I'm going to let them go. Clearly, they'll stay if it's something that they do. I don't want to rearrange. My opinion would be not to rearrange the committee reports, because Sharon, sometimes they're like 5 minutes. So, okay, we'll start at 6 and hope public comment goes at 6:45. It's going to start at 6:10, the public comment. So I think that you have to be cautious with using that as your,
so then maybe we just address the start time. Because I think that, I mean, Bernie, unfortunately, I think that you are able to get here earlier, and you'd rather leave earlier because you have to be at school really early in the morning the next day. But I know that David and Michael and Chad are coming from the city a lot of times and struggling to make that happen. I don't know, Steve, you seem to be in, you know, where in the world is Steve Ezzies today kind of time frame. So you're here. No, you're here, I know.
6 or I'll be here at 7. You know,
I mean, I would not be opposed to making it 7 o'clock.
No, nor will I. I mean, it's up to, you know, it's obviously up to the board. I mean,
So should we take a
people
vote on
want
it,
to
or
do.
how do we move forward then?
I think what we should do is, what problem are we solving? And I think, right, so are we solving problems? It sounds like, from a public comment perspective, we would start public comment, you know, an hour later than we do today. So if
That would
people,
make it easier?
yeah, so people feel like they can't make it to
Well,
the
I
meetings.
guess when we take this in a step function, the first question is, do we want to change the start time? That's one. I don't think we need to change public comment if we change this, you know, the start time, if we're going to do that. And then 2, how do people feel about going back to all meetings in public, or continuing on with the structure that we currently have, which is quarterly?
Yeah, I see them as 2 different issues.
Okay, good.
No, I'm done. I think start time is one issue, and where and how often we meet, or how we meet, rather.
How in step or unaligned are we with other boards of
The
the
Board
town
of-
in
the
terms
Board of
of
Selectmen-
in-person as well as time?
The Board of Selectmen meets in public for all their meetings.
Okay,
Board of Finance meets totally remotely.
got it. And start
So
times?
how does that help?
Start
Board of
times?
Finance meets at 6, and I believe the Board of Selectmen meets at 7, I think. Is that it, Phil? I mean, you got, yeah.
Well, that's neutral.
6:30 looks like the number.
Sure, I'll jump in with some suggestions here. One thing to emphasize, I think the start time, what matters the most is that we're making an assumption about when the public can participate, more so than when we can all participate, although it is important, of course, when we participate. We're trying to make that decision a little bit in a vacuum. I mean, we've got some public comment about a 7 p.m. time versus a 6. I think if we have a hypothesis that a 7 p.m. start time is better because of dinner,
I mean, we could certainly try that and shift to that for a while. It seems a sensible idea to me. The idea of remote versus in person, it really, to the point of everything that has been said, it was really a practical application of what generates the most ease for the community, given that some people it's easier when they're remote because they can just log on and quickly make a public comment as opposed to getting a sitter or whatever else is involved to be here in person. So maybe it's not a cadence that's going to make everybody happy, but maybe making the most people happy, we could potentially consider keeping it as it is, or maybe we go to an alternating cadence of like one remote, one in person, and we do a cadence that way. So to be clear, the two suggestions there will be potentially we explore a 7 p.m. start time, with a hypothesis being people can get to that more easily after dinner. And number two, we keep the remote sometimes and in person sometimes, but potentially we switch it to an every other meeting cadence. That's my best guesses, but I'm happy to do whatever we think is going to be the most responsive to the public.
And my train of thought did just come back to me. Just as a reminder, Steve's like, damn. I believe we talked about this. We're not obligated. I know we do it, Dan, but when we are in person, we are not obligated to record and save for playback later our meetings. It is a bonus, or it is something we go above and beyond, and we should strive for better than the bar or better than average. But when it comes down to a technological failure, we can't get the microphones to work, whatever the case may be, we do not have an obligation to store and record for later meetings that are in person. Whereas when we are hybrid or even partially remote, I believe we are required to record and have available for later. Is that right, Dan?
As far as I know, yeah. We stream live meetings with an older system, but yeah, there's if a meeting is in person, we are not legally obligated to stream it or to post recordings online afterwards.
Okay.
Steps. What's our next steps?
Pardon me?
What's our next steps? Do we take a vote as a board? How do we move forward with this? Any idea? Well, hold on, Peter. You haven't said anything. Come on.
I'll chime in on one thing. Most of the legwork of the board is done in committee, and those are remote. And it serves us in the community well because of the voluminous and recorded, because there's so much decks that we go through. I mean, certainly in our finance and operations, but now the EOC, that it's actually a better method. So I like the idea of at least remote for that reason, right? I mean, a lot of work's done and then it's reported. With respect to how we move forward, I think why doesn't, I'm going to put David on the spot a little bit, why doesn't a communication committee write a recommendation given our inputs? And then we can say we agree with the recommendation rather than holding a formal vote, because I don't know if that's the methodology, but if a recommendation comes out of committee, then our next meeting we can say we agree with the recommendation and then formalize it that way. Does that make sense?
I think we would come back to you immediately and simply say,
what Chad said.
What do you, right, what is it that is best
Well,
for
now,
the Board of Ed?
it's
So I
good.
think-
If you want to formalize it this way, that's all right with,
Yeah, I
that's
mean,
all right
I
with
think
me too.
it's
And
on
we
the
can say,
agenda. I
that's a
think we
good
should-
recommendation.
Yeah, I think we should do two things. I think we should, if proper, we should vote on a change of start time. I think that's one issue. And then if proper, we should vote on whether or not we maintain the hybrid, essentially, I guess, rememorialize what I believe we did 2 years ago, which is minimum of one in-person meeting per calendar quarter, more as necessary based on the material being presented. And, or make a change, right? So I think there's two separate issues. So I don't know if, I'm happy to kind of put those items out there and see where they go.
I know we were talking about my preferences and the start time, and I'm really okay doing with what's best for the public. I just wanted to, in thinking of if we start later, I wonder how that would affect our agenda and our heavy-hitting topics, how long we plan our agendas to be. We want to make sure that if we're making big decisions, that we're as fresh as we can and focused as we go through. So just being cognizant, if we do move that timetable back, a good sense of when the most important voting items would be on the agenda in that time frame.
Okay, so, you gonna say something?
No, I was gonna, I think I was gonna agree with you and concur that we should just
Oh, okay.
decide.
So let's decide one start time. Is there a consensus on the board that we want to either maintain the current start time, which is 6 PM, or move it to 7 PM? And I don't know if it's a formal vote or,
I say 7.
I agree with Sharon.
Agreed.
Yeah, I will too. 7.
I'm good with 7.
I thought you were going to say 6:30.
Well, 6:30 was really the compromise. That's what
7's fine.
we're
That's
good
great.
for,
There we
but
go.
7 is
So
okay.
That's step one. Now, the second step is.
So that's moving forward, so our April meeting, I
We'll
want
start at 7 o'clock.
clarification, will start at 7 PM. Okay.
And now, do we want to change the current format from in-person meetings quarterly to, I guess we could go to no meetings in person, that's one alternative,
Or every other.
or every other.
Is
I'm
it-
in favor of maintaining it as is.
I agree.
I agree, and one compelling reason is, particularly for you and I, we travel heavily. So the meetings that, we
Well, for me,
somehow
that's-
have to figure
For
out
me,
in
that's-
person
For me,
around
that's
that.
not the reason. I actually find, this is going to sound odd, I actually found COVID and learning how to do things remotely more practical. And I find it to be effective. And so as a result of that, I'm very happy to maintain it, as is.
Let me jump in. I think the most relevant point is to David's suggestion that this is really about what is the most useful for the public. And I think it's pretty useful bit of data we've been shown tonight, which is by having both elements, both some live and some remote, it gives us the best chance to have the most convenience for the most number of people. Some would prefer exclusively in person. Some might prefer exclusively remote because they just put in earbuds and listen while they make dinner or something, But what we're trying to do is achieve the widest audience we can. And so therefore I think the reason to stick with what we have is because it does afford as wide a net as possible to reach people the best way to reach them. My only suggestion there is, I think we could consider shifting to an every other kind of cadence. So you would, I guess at that point, have 2 in-person meetings some quarters and 1 others, because you'd be alternating each month. I'm not attached to that. I just think it's one potential way to slightly increase the ratio of in-person if we wanted to contemplate that.
I'll give you one more data point. I believe our newest substitute teacher, Brad, originally reached out to us just 2 months ago through remote. I think you may have emailed me directly, and I sort of redirected you to Steve, and he said you couldn't make the meeting. So I think the hybrid, in the case of Brad, actually worked out really well, because if he had to, he couldn't make the in-person meeting, which would have delayed what was, I think, important to him. So by having that, I believe, if I'm misspeaking, let me know, but I think the hybrid in this particular case also showed that something that was top of mind and something that was time sensitive to a member of the community who couldn't get in person had the opportunity to join us remote. I believe he spoke right at our meeting, and here we are a month later, 2 months later, and he loves us all, so we've resolved the issue. So I think that from a data point, I think it shows that the hybrid appears to appeal to the community.
So similar to the 7 p.m., should we maybe shift to a vote on the idea of maintaining what we have been? Do we want to consider the idea of alternating remote and in person, or stick with as it is?
Why don't we just have a sense of the board on what we currently have, which is in-person meeting every quarter.
40% are in person.
Yeah. Is there any move by the board to change that?
No, I think the variety is pretty compelling in terms of the public participation. Doesn't it's not perfect for everybody, but it does cast a wide net, so I think it's a good compromise we have.
And does anyone see anything differently?
The only thing is, I think it's important that, again, if we start to see a call for people who want, if we start to see things happen in the community that need to be addressed, and we know that there's going to be a strong community voice, we need to make sure that we're flexible and we can change any hybrid meetings into in-person meetings so that we're addressing the needs of the community. That's the only thing I would recommend
Okay.
if we're going to stay in this format.
So is the sense of the board we maintain the current schedule? Okay, great. So the change will be that our meetings will now start at 7 o'clock, and we'll continue the schedule of a remote, in-person meeting every quarter.
And just for clarification, we have 3 formal meetings left, April, May, June. One of them will be in person, correct, Ms. Saketa? June? June.
Okay, great. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is a discussion and vote, if necessary, on the Mile of Safety Officer. So let me just bring you up to date on that. And Phil, help me here. The cost of a Mile of Safety Officer, an additional Mile of Safety Officer, is 190. What's the exact number, Phil?
So I think based on what we have budgeted, which would be at the max, right, because now we're going to have a second officer, the all-in cost at 100% will be to the tune of $193,000.
183,000?
93.
$193,000. And the current arrangement for the existing Mile of Safety Officer is the Board of Education is responsible for 60% of the cost, and the town responsible for 40% of the 40% of the cost. The total cost, regardless of who's responsible for it, is in neither budget. It's not in our budget, nor is it in the town's budget. And in my discussions, and Phil or Lisa, I don't think there's and I think the police commission is here as well, I don't believe there's a willingness for the town to assume their 40% allocation of the cost if we decide this is something we want. I think it'll be an expense that the Board of Education would have to assume, which means we would have to either change our budget before it goes before the Board of Finance and then the town, or we would have to find effectively $200,000, and the budget is currently proposed, and I don't believe that, you can share it, I don't believe that we have a $200,000 incremental expense that we can take on without cutting $200,000 from the current budget. So it's kind of a sense of what people want to do here.
Phil, how'd you get to the 193?
So the 193 is assuming...
Could you just use that one?
The 193 assumes that the person who will fill this position is going to be at the top step, so to speak. What we've seen...
Sorry, repeat that.
Person who's at, probably, let's say, a sergeant. What we've seen for this year is that for the majority of the time, we have the sergeant, so to speak, who's in this role. So based on what we've seen historically, it's based on that.
The cost for the current Mile of Safety Officer?
It does. It's going to be, it's going to be in the same range.
About the cost.
What we have done for next year is that we're assuming, I think the contract for PD is a 3% increase. So we've pretty much factored a 3% increase over this year.
So just to clarify for people that might be watching, we have currently 1 Mile of Safety Officer in the budget, and the expense for that 1 Mile of Safety Officer reflects the 60-40 split with the town of Weston, with us assuming 60%.
That's correct.
and if we move to include a second mile of safety officer, we would incur the full cost of approximately $193,000. Correct?
Can I jump in on a couple of things? That's insane. It's insane for the town of Weston, whether it's the police commission or the board of selectmen, to be paying $193,000 to solve the problem, which I was told was if we hire an additional officer, we don't know the district is going to commit to paying for that officer year over year. So this is coming from the police commission, as far as I understand, that there was a resistance to hire another officer.
If I may, David, and you said district, we don't pay for police officers in our budget. I just want to be careful. Like the school resource officer, the SRO, that's out of the town budget. That's out of the police budget, the two SROs.
Okay. So
Right.
it's similar but different in that what was explained to me was I had a conversation with a couple of police commissioner folks, and I said, Phil told us $190,000. That seems impossible. What does a fully year-round patrol officer cost? And I don't know, I know that we don't have anyone from the police department here today, but Joe, do you have a rough idea just from your time being in the law enforcement, what a full law enforcement officer, not an SRO, not a detective, not a sergeant, a first year or second year patrol officer, what does that run?
Typically, David, that is set by the collective bargaining agreement, and that's negotiated. Each municipality has that rate.
Do you have an idea of what we pay?
It's tough for me to take a guess. I don't know if it's 65,000, 70,000. Step one for an entry-level patrol officer. I don't know if someone from the police commission would know that's here.
Yeah, aren't there a couple members of the police? Right, so let's say we bring in somebody. Right, but we're talking here about money. So $190,000 is insane. As a taxpayer, right, but I'm talking about as a taxpayer, $190,000 is insane. So if we can hire a full-time officer, so the $190,000 covers 8 hours a day for approximately, I believe, 181 days of the year, and maybe a little bit less, if I remember correctly from one of our meetings.
Well, why don't we get back to what the chief said?
Okay.
And the members of the police commission here. He believes that that our police department has the potential of losing up to 5 officers this year. Is that correct? Right. So, due to changes in how the pension works. So he's in the market to hire. Well, we'll be in the market to hire up to 5 police officers. It's not easy to hire a police officer. I don't want to speak, but we've heard that over and over again. And assuming we did hire a police officer, they belong to the police department. And so they get assigned to wherever the police department determines that they need to be. And you guys can jump in here. There are SROs in other towns, because of the shortage of police officers, that have been pulled out of that responsibility and put back into general policing. So we may, assuming we could even hire someone, or the town could hire someone, there's no guarantee they get assigned to the schools. I'm no expert in hiring police officers, but they're not easy to hire.
Right, but my thought is, if we can hire a full-time law enforcement officer for $80,000.
No, I know what the math is.
Right. Why would we even? The concept of the 60-40 to me is somewhat ridiculous, because for us that live in Weston, you're taking from the left hand and giving to the right hand, right? It's just.
No, but the point is, the operative word is if. That's, I mean,
Right, but we're going to have to hire potentially three, for sure, three officers, and it sounds like I've heard this before, that the town would like to hire two more people, right? I think, my question is simply, why are we,
well, it's not our decision then. It's a decision of the town that, you know, we can say, sure, you know, we'll pick up our 60% cost if you hire that police officer, but
right, I guess
can't
my
compel
question
them to do
is,
it.
I think at 193,000, it becomes a lot less palatable than 90,000, for example. So if the question is, would we benefit from having a second mile safety officer, I think that was settled at our last Board of Ed meeting. And we agreed we would benefit from it. But now we're talking about putting a cost
Well, I
to
actually
it.
think what the police department said was they thought that our current configuration meets our needs. If we wanted to increase police presence on campus, they would recommend an additional mile safety officer. That's what their recommendation was.
Right, but we as a board voted that we thought it would be beneficial to the students.
Subject to the cost.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But we did, right. But we did agree it would be beneficial. At 193,000 versus 90,000, the numbers are significantly different. So my point is, as a taxpayer and as a Board of Ed member, it's why would we even be paying, and this might be a question for the police commission, so it might not be inappropriate for here, but as a taxpayer, if we could hire a full-time officer for $100,000 a year or $90,000 a year and have them year-round, and of that 108 of the year-round 180 days they're on school road, as a taxpayer, that's a lot better use of my dollars than paying overtime.
If I may. Oh, if I may. I believe that, Chief Henyon has been here several times, both in executive and public session, and I believe he did talk about the recommendation that it be a mile of safety officer instead of a new police officer. I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but I know these meetings are recorded. He has said why, and one of the factors, I believe, has to do with the fact that the town currently does not have enough officers, and that if they were going to hire more officers, the first thing wouldn't be that they would hire one to put an additional one in the school at the town's expense. So that means that we would have to fund that officer. Now, when we talk about, and I'm just remembering what he said, about hiring another officer, because I remember having conversations with him that, as Mr. Ezzi said, it is a challenge in this day and age to hire another officer, bring them in. If they're a brand-new officer, off the bat, we have to pay 6 months' salary while they attend the police academy. So I think that there is a concern that, well, we could just hire another officer, well, even however much we pay, it may not be easily implemented because of that. I understand what you're saying about the numbers, and it is. It's whether it's the town money, the Board of Ed money, it's your money. You all pay taxes. But I just kind of wanted to clarify that one point. The other point, I believe, was they talked about when they can rotate it through the department, it gives everyone a solid understanding of all of the buildings and what goes on in all of the buildings, instead of just hiring one person. And the last thing, and then I'll let you discuss, has to do with, now my train of thought just left.
You saw
The
cost of it.
SROs, the school resource officers that work 180 days during the summer and school vacations and all that, they're police officers in town. I'm just making that point. I don't want people to think that they are not actively engaged in the summer with working for the town.
As a taxpayer, I'm just floored that we could have 2 full-time law enforcement officers in this town for the price that we are paying to have 1 overtime police officer patrol the mile of safety. That, to me, as a taxpayer, That's insanity.
Well, and if I may, remember, and you say the money is the money, whether it be in the town or the district. That's what we're doing now with one. That is the cost of the one we have.
Right, which
Just
begs the
to
question,
clarify.
the police commission should hire a full-time, if we're giving you 100, taxpayers, we, not to worry about it, taxpayers, are funding $190,000 a year to have a law enforcement officer work 8 hours a day, and we could spend the same money and get 2 full-time law enforcement officers. That is a problem probably with the police commission. Is it a Board of Finance problem? Okay, I'd go there too then. But my point being is that it's just insanity that we should change our school buses to Mercedes. I mean, to spend that kind of money, it's just why we've been doing this. So I know this is probably not a Board of Ed issue, but I could see where this is going, which is, I mean, who wants to spend $193,000? We'll find that out shortly. But from a Board of Ed perspective, just for us to continue to do that next year, the year after, and the year after is just insanity. We have to work with the Board of Finance and the Police Commission to hire 2 police officers who are full-time police officers for the town of Weston who can patrol School Road while school's in session. And the rest of the year, they can do all of the other good work that our law enforcement officers do. Soapbox? Yeah.
The numbers are the numbers, you're absolutely right. You know, you can't refute the numbers, the numbers are the numbers. Any other comments? Do we need to take a vote on this, that we either want to increase our budget by $193,000 or not?
I can, last time, let me read the motion that was, that passed last time. Maybe that helps
Yeah, no,
clarify.
please.
Move that the Weston Board of Education recommend adding a second mile of safety officer to the 25 budget and begin discussions regarding the cost with the town of Weston. Now, all in favor, it was a 5-2.
Thank you. So, pardon me?
Either we unwind it or we start funding it.
Yeah, I think we need to take a vote as to whether or not we want to go forward with a mile of safety officer at a cost of $193,000 to be assumed fully by the Board of Education.
I personally think that we should fund it. I think the number is astronomical, but the ship has sailed too far now to go back and look at some other things that we funded that maybe to some of the Board of Ed members are of a lower priority.
This is just a question about process. Is that something that we can do? Because we've just gone through a months-long budget process with lots and lots of numbers, Phil teaching us and showing us to get to a very specific number that we all approved. Can we add a budget item on a
Well, to my
line
knowledge,
item
the Board
vote?
well, I don't know the answer to that actually, but the only binding vote or the 2 binding votes in our budget are the Board of Finance, who has not heard our budget yet, or has not approved our budget yet, and then ultimately the town.
Can't we just go to the put it on the Board of Selectmen?
They don't.
Go for a special appropriation.
No, it's a permanent position.
Well, it's overtime, so that was one of the reasons why.
No, but it's permanent. It's recurring. It's operating. I mean, they could say, fine, we have special appropriation for this current, well, we wouldn't have to do it in this current fiscal. It would be for the next fiscal year. It's a permanent position. It'd be a special appropriation I guess it would be a special appropriation for 1 year, and then part of our operating budget.
Yeah, what I'm
forward.
thinking is a conversation needs to take place, I guess, with the Board of Finance on this 190. I mean, the fact that we, independent of a second mile of safety officer, being that we paid for the first mile of safety officer almost double what it would cost to have a full-time patrol officer. It doesn't make any sense from a dollars and cents perspective. There's so many other, if we can get the same thing for half the cost, we can take half the cost and put it towards something like books and curriculum and other things and get the best of both worlds. So I personally think we should fund it, however it is, the board, special appropriation, and immediately start looking at how we can work with the Board of Finance not to have $190,000 expense times 2 in the next school year budget.
Well, that discussion is Board of Selectmen, Police Commission, Board of Finance, and ourselves.
Because that would also affect the current mile of safety officer position. If we can't just have one that would be a full-time position where he's being assigned for a shift and someone else is getting overtime for it, and we're funding 60 and they're funding 40. It's going to change a position completely. So it would be an overhaul of both positions if we were to follow that.
So what I'm suggesting is that
And that's not a bad thing.
we work starting tomorrow or wherever is appropriate. We work with the Police Commission and the Board of Finance so that they can get 2 more full law enforcement officers who the chief would assign to mile of during school hours, the mile of safety, 2 of them, and when school's not in session, the community benefits with all the other things that they do.
We could do that, but are we going to, we would have a $200,000, nearly $200,000 increase in next year's budget. And then you're saying going forward, hopefully not have that be a recurring cost, right? So,
yeah.
Right. So I guess what we need to do is we need to determine whether or not we want to do that $200,000 next year, or whether or not we just want to start talking to the Board of Finance and Police Commission about the potential of doing it in the future, and next year just sticking with what we have, with 1 mile of safety officer.
We'd be asking the town boards to, we currently pay $190,000. We're suggesting, rather than that, you use those monies to hire 2 full-time police officers, of which we will pay 60%. We're going to have to pay part of it, or we don't. But my guess is if we say we won't, then I doubt that the Police Commission and the Board of Finance will say, oh, sure, we'll take that on. Because right now, it's not their expense. It would be 100% their expense. I mean, it is what it is, and money's fungible, but it's not as simple it's not as simple a conversation as we're currently paying $190,000, but we're paying 60% of that. It's moving the same amount of money around, but people go, oh no, I don't want to take
Yeah,
that.
it's a matter of whose budget does it show up in. At the end of the day, the 7-Eleven.
I mean, it's kind of foolish. I mean, we're spending $190,000 of everyone in this room's money.
Yeah.
Who gets assigned to their fair share of it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's silly to say, well, I don't want my budget to go up 5% or 3% or whatever the number is. We're not.
Yeah, I think that the way you explained it, Steve, is correct. I think that regardless of what we decide for this coming year, I think we have to immediately look at $190,000 expense for the 1 mile of safety officer and say, as a taxpayer, that's insanity. And we should be working.
No, that's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
But right now, we're trying to determine about the 2nd mile of safety officer.
Right.
And whether or not we want to go back to the Board of Finance and increase our budget by $200,000 or $193,000.
So we need to take a vote on that then.
I believe we do.
Yeah, just without going into all the details of the executive sessions, the mile of safety officer was one of several recommendations that we could look forward to continually improving our safety. I get nervous at this cost, what this is going to preclude from us going forward of some of those other really important items that we might want to consider for safety as well. I know when I voted yes, because last go around, it was because it was a good idea to investigate and get all the information, get the actual cost, and give us a better chance of being able to rank how that would affect us going forward. I'm really hesitant of committing to this number, not knowing what kind of burden we're going to have in the long run. And again, when we evaluate it against our other safety agenda items, how that's going to affect us going forward.
Well, to go back to the very beginning, it's Kimberly, is that correct? I mean, you brought up some really interesting points, that it's not just a police officer in a car. There's a lot of other things going on, and I know we have in our capital budget for the next 3 years, $330,000, and I can speak for myself, you brought up some points that my guess is we've not thought of, that we should address. I mean, there's some interesting points you brought up, and
I think that they're certainly interesting, and we will continue to discuss them, but I would be hesitant to say they are not things that we haven't thought of.
no, I'm sure you've thought of them, but I mean, we're just talking money now.
Sure. I think that our biggest challenge is how to be transparent while protecting public safety. I mean, look, when you talk about and you move forward with like the commitments, and I know what you're talking about, Bernie, and exactly as Kimberly said, it's a multi-pronged approach where there's stuff, physical things, that's the capital budget, appropriations, which we have talked about and planned and looked at very carefully through the lens of what we feel we need, also keeping in mind the work of the Educational Optimization Committee and not doing things to a building like here that is going to, some of those things are going to be addressed, so to find that balance. There is certainly the staffing, and, last year at this time, clearly, and when you look at the chart of where most people came out on that public meeting, it was when safety was discussed last spring. And so now we have a director, which is great. We have a security team, which is certainly much more enhanced than, I've been here a long time. So that's positive. And then with regards to the whole, what I would call social emotional health piece, and perhaps we haven't articulated as well as we can. I think our relationships with Yale, with the training that we did based on a community member that came here last spring, and we worked with Dr. Elliott. I think that we're moving in the right direction. I think that this mile of safety was something that the police chief said, if you wanted to put another layer on staffing, it would be that. And, when we first began talking about it, both in executive and public session, and people supported it, like, yes, that would contribute to keeping the conflict outside at the lower levels. However, to be frank, the numbers involved, I think, that was maybe the piece that, in really looking at the cost of all of this, and the one versus the two, and our fiscal responsibility, as well as, I would say, our fiscal responsibility to the town, has brought to light some other considerations, and there are some other layers to all of this, specifically involving the town, the police department, and what the town needs, if you will. So I'll stop there, but that's kind of where we're at right now.
I have some questions for Joe, which I think will help inform me whether or not I want to support that kind of spend. So the mile of safety officer today, well, we'll back up. We know that the police department's mantra is always keep the fight outside. We know at the high school and the middle school, generally speaking, Captain Brodacki said, the person that shows up with a gun intending to do harm is somebody from the inside. At the upper school levels, at the intermediate school and the elementary school, it's somebody from the outside. It's a disgruntled parent. It's whatever the case may be. For the mile of safety officer, do they, during the course of an 8-hour day, do they leave their patrol vehicle and actually walk the interior of the schools?
Yes, that's a good point. I know the other day when I showed up in the morning, the mile of safety officer was out of his car walking the campus. They are invited to come in. They come in and check with security. They come in, they have radio. We want them to build relationships with the administration. So we do offer them to come in. Some of them take advantage of foot patrols. They're in their cars. They have that flexibility to do, both of those.
do we have, I guess my question is, I'm trying to, as a taxpayer, I think $193,000, again, every dollar we spend that's not directly educating our kids is a dollar that needs to be scrutinized, and I would be probably one of the most disappointed people at this table not to approve that expenditure, but you have to be fiscally conservative, at least I am known to be that way. So my question would be, can we encourage or can we ask, and this might be a question more for Lisa, in absence of that second mile of safety officer, who I think one of the things that we were looking forward to was having that officer go into the schools, especially the Hurlbut and Wiss, and create a little bit of a rapport, have more of a presence known. Sort of the way the SROs, I understand the relationship is different between the SRO and the upper age student and the younger kids. But just to have that presence and have that known that there is a police officer who is twice a day going to walk our entire building and stop and say hi to people, do we have the ability to either encourage or within the description of the job say, for the 24-25 school year, the mile of safety officer, when after the rush of the morning and the afternoon, the in-between hours, we want that person to be primarily focused on Hurlbut and Wiss, and we would like that officer to, for example, twice a day do a tour of Hurlbut and Wiss, where they get out of their cruiser and they walk the building and they make those connections and students can potentially see them. Can we formalize that type of engagement?
And David, I don't know if we, we do have an MOU with our school resource officers between the Board of Ed and the police department, but I think we're kind of doing that in some sense already, where the officers are, coming into our schools. And again, they're not our employees, they're not Board of Ed employees, but in partnership and speaking with the chief and with Captain Berdacki, and even, having conversations with the officers, they love being around the school kids, they love being on campus, and they make that a big, big commitment on a daily basis. And that's not just the mile of safety officer, that's other officers that are on patrol, but because patrol is the backbone of the department, they do have calls for service that they have to answer to.
Right.
Well, I'm sorry, can I
Yeah.
jump in? I think it's important to note that there's a big difference between what the mile of safety officer does, like you said, patrol, and what the school resource officer does. The school resource officers also have, and it is part of the MOU, a secondary assignment to another school. Jason Kim is at Wiss, and Johnny is at
High school.
No, I'm talking about the secondary assignments.
High school in Hurlbut.
Johnny is at Hurlbut, correct? Yes. And perhaps the elementary principals, well, any of the principals could comment. I was in school the other day, and the detective was there in the high school. I only know because, frankly, I asked if he would give me a lift down the road, so Jody didn't have to pick me up because I can't drive. They're a lot more visible than I think people think, but please, can you share, especially at the lower schools? I've walked in and seen the mile of safety people in there. Ladies?
Yes, that's true. They do have a lot of visibility at the elementary schools, outside and inside.
Yeah, I guess what I'm asking is it possible, I mean, at the end of the day, the Board of Ed budget is funding the mile of safety officer, right? And the upside is over time we can cancel it, from what I understand, pretty much on a moment's notice. That's what the chief seems to like about the overtime. So my question is, to try and offset not having a second mile of safety officer, can we memorialize or can we have an MOU? There's what they've been doing potentially informally, and there's expectations. And I agree, the SRO is different. We've settled that. That's one of the areas that I hadn't thought of it that way. And then when Captain Berdacki spoke about SROs versus intermediate and elementary schools, I'm like, wow, that light bulb went off in my head where, yeah, an SRO is not the appropriate resource in elementary. So,
But can I interrupt for 2 seconds on this? I'm sorry. By bringing the officer inside the school on a regular basis, especially if he's doing 2 tours of each of the schools every day, you're taking him off of what he needs to be doing, which is being outside and protecting the perimeter. Because remember, the threat is from outside for those lower schools. So for the mile of safety officer to spend too much time inside, he loses his effectiveness in his role. So for that reason, I think that's why they have the SROs assigned to coming down to the lower schools, so that they're developing the relationships with the kids and the kids see them, and there's, the visibility. Of course, the mile of safety officer probably has to go to the bathroom once in a while, and he comes into the schools or whatever. But I think that we want to keep him or her outside, to be honest with you, as much as possible, in my opinion, since that's where the threat lies for the lower schools.
I hear what you're saying, David, and I think that it's not an MOU, it's none of that with these officers. They are patrol officers. We have very clear MOU that actually we're reviewing for the SROs. But if I'm hearing you correctly, the mile of safety officer, the second, was the idea behind it was to split the two and have one at secondary and one at elementary. Chief Henyon is just great. I mean, as far as being receptive, talking, he came over to my office today to talk to me about, not about this, but about something else. So there's great communication. But to be able to say, Chief, if we have the 1 mile of safety officer, can we please try to emphasize their presence at the lower schools? I have no problem having that conversation, and I'm confident that he's very receptive to that, but we can't really dictate it in an MOU. The other thing that we need to remember is those officers are the ones that do the traffic. So they are the ones that do the traffic in the morning and in the afternoon. Just clarifying that.
I think we've discussed our agenda item, and we've done our diligence on the town of Weston and the police commission with the expense. So I think it comes down to simply, I looked at some language we can implement, but it's simply a motion to, if the Board of Ed wishes to pursue adding an additional $193,000 to fiscal year 25 budget for the purposes of funding and underwriting a second mile safety officer. So that would be my motion, and we can take a vote on whether to pursue that path.
Okay, is there a second to that motion?
I don't know about that, actually. Let me jump in for a second.
Okay.
I feel a little obligation to refer to public comment now for, I think the fourth time, just because the person in public comment was talking about this multi-pronged approach. It should be said with Bernie's comment that it wasn't just that our law enforcement agencies were sharing that there are multiple things that they could do, but there was actually multiple, to this point of a multi-pronged approach, there were multiple things that actually, in terms of ensuring safety, were actually a higher priority than the additional mile of safety officer.
I know, but we're not talking about that now.
Well, I know, but what's new in this is before we voted to, yes, we should consider this, but now we'd be voting to tag $193,000 for this one role, correct? And once we make that vote, we're saying, close to $200K for this officer.
And can I clarify? I think what Chad may be saying, and 100% correct me if I'm wrong, we approved $333,000 in this upcoming budget for security initiatives. Why couldn't we? I'm not suggesting we do. And if I'm not understanding what you're saying, correct me.
But that's
we
capital.
could reallocate.
It's capital.
Capital, it's different.
Not operating.
That was capital, and the director had enumerated his initiatives in his presentation last month. So we know what the capital budget funding objectives are because the director had his bullets that enumerated that. This is separate. This is a operational expense.
Well,
so that you can't conflate them.
Well, there was no on a side note, just to correct you, there was no details in the initiative, so we don't know where the $333,000 is going. We have some very rough ideas. All right. Chad, sorry.
Yeah, so, it's a fair point you're bringing up. The reason I jumped in on this is because my vote last time, which was to, yes, we should consider this, specifically because Chief Henyon said, yeah, this could be a good consideration. My vote, if we're evaluating at $200K for one of the things they said was a good idea, but it's not actually the highest priority based on the suggestions they had of if we had, what we would do, and I won't get into them. I understand that's about being purposefully protecting security, then I think the calculus on the vote changes pretty dramatically. So actually, never mind. We can have the vote. I just am realizing I think I'd have to change my vote. So yes, if that's the process, we should vote.
It does feel like this is more of a police issue.
A which issue?
More of a police issue. A lack of being able to hire police officers for the town at a, let's say, palatable rate. Because right now we're spending $193,000
No,
on the first mile safety officer.
You're mixing apples with, look, let's cut to the chase.
Yeah.
They want to hire they need potentially up to 5 police officers to do just policing.
Town. Correct.
Just policing.
Correct.
That is a challenge, and that's what the chief said. So if we're going to say to them, what you really ought to do, now you ought to hire 7, because we're going to split the 193 by 2, you should do that. That's a conversation we certainly, but we also run the risk of, let's assume they go out and hire 7. Now we'll figure out how that's going to be paid. There's no guarantee that something goes on in this town where we thought they hired 2 for the schools, and there's something going on where, sorry, we need those police officers elsewhere, and the schools are uncovered. Because they are members of the police department. They're
Right.
not, they're members of the police department whether they work overtime or whether they're full-time police officers. And they are assigned where needed.
Unless there's some arrangement whereby we pick up part of the cost of the police officers.
I guess we could, but I think
For
that's
the
probably a
commitment.
union
Yep.
discussion as well. I don't think it's I'm riffing here, but my guess is it's a much bigger conversation I think it's a larger conversation.
So why couldn't we, to Michael's point, make a motion to, first of all, we're talking about September, right? And so give or take, that's 6 months from now. Why, rather than having it be as binary as, are we going to approve a $200,000 spend, unbudgeted spend for a second mile safety officer, why wouldn't we look at approving a budget of up to, for example, $100,000 to, I'm trying to know how to word this, but basically, at the end of the day, it's coming out of my pocket as a taxpayer and the rest of everyone's. Rather than we will fund up to $100,000, which would be 100% of someone's salary, to hire a full-time law enforcement officer. So what we'd be
We
doing
could do
today.
that, but what's the guarantee the second year?
Well,
All of a
the
sudden,
guar-
that person is an employee of the town of Weston, and there's no guarantee that it's going to be funded other than the 1 year
Right.
that
Well,
we've
there's 2
agreed to.
guarantees.
No, there's no guarantee.
Well, okay, there's near guarantees since we're taxpayers. If the Board of Ed can no longer fund this position after the first year, then as a taxpayer, the cost can move to the town of Weston, and we as taxpayers can vote on that. As a parent, I don't care. I did the math. $100,000 for the average taxpayer is about $18 a year. So I don't care as a taxpayer if you tax me.
Look, I'm not debating it. I'm just saying, we could say, sure, the police department, we'll pick up $100,000. You go and hire that police officer, and I would assume that we're going to hear, well, how do I know that $100,000 is going to be there in the following year?
Well, yeah.
Or it would also have to be approved by the Board of Finance,
Oh, yeah,
correct?
the whole,
I mean,
the process, the
that's-
process.
Right, but what I'm
part
saying
of
is
the
that we're looking
issue.
at this in such a binary way right now, which is, do we want to spend $190,000? And I think that we're looking at it too binary. I think what we should be doing is saying, it's a different vote at this point, that do we vote or do we agree to increase our budget by, I mean, if we could hire a patrol officer at $80,000.
We're not hiring anybody.
Well, when I say we, the town of Weston, I mean, we're such a small
But
town and 80%
I
of our
understand that,
budget.
but we're not hiring anybody.
All right, so,
And those people at the end, they're the one that's going to be hiring them, and they're all union employees, and they all fall under the various union agreements. So as much as we can give them our guarantee, they're going to come back and say it's not much, and Ed's already said that, actually. It's not much of a guarantee.
Okay, so how about a motion where we commit up to some dollar amount for to hire or to offset or whatever the wording is, a full-time law enforcement officer.
But it's not, well,
we can do it.
we
We
can
could write a
mean,
check
we
for
can say it, but my guess
$100,000.
is first of all, we have to increase our budget. And second, they could say, well, how do I go out with any certainty in year two that money's going to be there? What do I
Right.
get?
There's no guarantees, but as a taxpayer, it goes out to the community. And whether you tax me for the Board of Ed or you tax me as the Board of Finance, whether it's in the 80% of my taxes or 20% of my taxes, I don't care.
I give you kudos for trying. I give you kudos for creative problem solving, David. I really do. But I don't think that's within this board's purview. And I think that we need to make a decision as to whether or not we're going to be spending the $193,000 this year moving forward. And I appreciate it. I think this is a bigger conversation for the Board of Ed, the Board of Finance, and the Police Commission to maybe get together and have a conversation where we can talk about how making a move like the one you're suggesting actually benefits the town. Right? But that's not something we're going to be able to do tonight. So right now we need to decide as a board whether or not we are going to fund an additional mile of safety officer. I mean, talk about like the 11th hour, trying to get it in to the Board of Finance. This is like the 11th and a half hour because they're already considering it now before they have their conversation. So we just need to make that decision, I think, tonight. And then I think as a board, you're right. We should have a conversation with the Board of Finance. We should have a conversation with the Police Commission and try to figure out a solution that's a lot more attractive for taxpayers.
The motion's been set, so do I have a second?
I'll second.
So can you
Motion's
read the
been
motion
second.
again?
Verbally, it was to address, after our due diligence, whether the Board of Ed wants to pursue requesting an additional $193,000 for a second mile of safety officer in our fiscal year 25 budget.
Okay, so the motion's been seconded. All those in favor?
Are we going to do a roll call, or are we going to do?
Roll call individually, please.
We can do a roll call, Philly.
We did last time.
Yeah.
Right, Chad?
Can I give more than a yes or no answer, or just a yes or no?
I only
Yes or
want
no,
yea
please.
nay.
Yes, no, or abstain? That's your choice.
No.
Michael? Sharon?
Still no.
David?
Yes.
Bernie?
No.
No.
And I'm no as well. Okay.
So the motion is not to pursue this.
Right.
As recorded in the meetings.
However, now looking at the Police Commission, can we open this conversation about acknowledging that we're spending $193,000 currently, and have a conversation with you about maybe there's a better way to improve safety across the town, because it's, thank you, Don. You good with
Is that
Frank?
something we can schedule, like a special meeting for where all
Yeah,
the members
let's
are?
do it.
That's what I think we should do, David.
Okay. And can we do that in the next 4 weeks?
Well, make a call tomorrow.
Keep the momentum going.
Oops.
So just for the meeting minutes, the action is to engage the Police Commission on this discussion, and hopefully before the ATPM at the end of April. And the Board of Finance. Thank you.
Right, okay. Now we're moving on to new business.
Yes, an acceptance of the WEF donation, Dr. Henkel.
Thank you. Teaching and learning. So last year, the Teacher Leader Fellowship Academy is a program that is offered through Sacred Heart University. It is organized by Director Dr. Betty Sternberg. She is the former Connecticut Education Commissioner. And Dr. Michael Alfano, who is the Dean of the Education the College of Education from Sacred Heart. Last year, we were able to participate at the end of the school year with one of their professional development sessions that they focused on bringing back joy in the school system. And we brought a cohort of teachers and administrators to attend that session. The feedback we received was positive, and we really wanted to see how we can get more involved in the Teacher Leader Fellowship Academy in the next coming school year, which was this school year. At that time, the budget had already passed, and as a member of the WEF, I wouldn't say board, but team, I was able to be sitting with the WEF community partners, and they're always looking for opportunities to support teachers, support our schools, specifically around professional development. So I was able to write a grant to support a year-long cohort that supports 2 teachers and 1 administrator in every school this school year to participate in the Teacher Leader Fellowship Academy. It's a series of 5 professional development opportunities. Teacher leaders across the state network and share ideas and experiences throughout the sessions, and we get to visit schools. We participate in keynote speakers, and the theme of this year is reimagining schools. And so we accept this grant on their behalf so that we can continue that partnership this school year. We've gotten great feedback from our leaders and our teachers that have already participated in some of the sessions, many of which are outside of the school day. And ironically, our first session that we attended was in Manchester at one of the elementary schools that is really focusing on redesign and furniture and how that integrates into the learning experience. And so some of it was also related to some of our EOC work as well.
So we sort of did this simultaneously, and as we use the funds, we'd like you to approve them, the acceptance of the gift.
Are there questions? Can I have a motion to approve?
I so move.
So, but the motion is move that the Weston Board of Education accept the donation from WEF in the amount of $12,000.
Yes.
That's it? Okay.
That's it. Just to be clear, Betty Sternberg was able to work with us knowing that there was a time frame around the acceptance, so we were able to participate while the process continued. So that was very thoughtful.
Very generous of them.
It was.
Is there a second to that motion?
A second.
All those in favor, say aye.
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 Tina, real quickly, I did the portrait of the graduate, and it was so interesting. I did it last year as well. Something came up furniture related, and I immediately thought of Chad. And because you brought up furniture, you mentioned what part of the WEF is furniture, right?
It was about the school that they went to. They had interesting furniture. Yes, David?
Okay.
Yeah, the school focus was integrating the portrait of the graduate into their curriculum and in their culture, school culture and climate, and some of it was some of the aspect was talking about flexible furniture and the different seating that they had there as well.
One of the students who was graduating said, which I thought was super interesting, they wish that rather than sitting in desks all day long, we had, like, I don't want to say pub-style tables, and stools where they could get up and sit and kind of move around a little bit. It would just help them out immensely. And immediately I thought about Chad. So anyway, I don't know. I guess we can't use the money from WEF for furniture, but if we can.
And that's all part of our plan as we move forward with the EOC. Thank you.
The next item is
It's the policy or the regulations specifically regarding immunizations. This is another first read that, thank you, Policy Committee led by Ms. Ferraro. It's been very active. Tracy, if you could briefly take us through this.
Yeah, I will just highlight again how grateful we are to have Kristen Abreu as our nurse supervisor. You'll notice that there are a lot of policies around health and wellness that we are updating under her leadership, which is much appreciated. This first policy is very straightforward. It is, again, aligning us with current requirements in Connecticut. Specifically, this immunization policy indicates that religious exemptions are no longer allowed in Connecticut for immunizations. So the language in our policy has been updated to reflect current state laws. The deadline for any family who had a religious exemption has long passed. That was in April of 2021. And religious exemptions can't transfer from another state. So that's the purpose of this policy.
And remember, this is the first read, so it will come back for a second. Any questions, feedback, concerns? Okay. Moving to the next one, administration of medication.
This is a much lengthier policy. This is designed to address new statutes in Connecticut that actually went into effect in January of 2022. I do want to highlight, just because it prompted a fair amount of discussion in the policy committee, that this policy addresses the administration of Narcan if we ever had a situation that warranted it. This policy will now match our procedural guidelines for our nurses, and I can certainly address any questions or attempt to address any questions that you have.
Great. Yep. Moving right along, age of attendance, 5112, age of attendance, and this is a hot topic given the consideration of when students age out and when students begin. Dr. Henkel, if you could take us through this policy, please.
So this is an updated age of attendance policy that was actually on the docket last school year, and we put it on pause because the state has updated their entry into kindergarten. And that date changed for a student to be 5 years old by September 1, which was different than in previous years. So we are back at updating this policy, which reflects not only the admission process before a student enters kindergarten at age 5, but also what the process is after the student is age 5. We do rely on our Shipman policies as well when we are making these updates, and so we did that in this case as well. You'll also see that the regulation that is attached here is also brand new. We were able to implement this regulation this school year, so Laura Cadis and her team, we were able to work collaboratively to ensure that the regulation is actually a practice that we are trying to implement this school year, and that process is reflected in the regulation.
Questions?
Moving right along.
Great.
We have a discussion on some very interrelated things, I would say. It has to do with request for evaluation of instructional materials review committee report, and then the discussion of policy 6161. Dr. Henkel, if you could take us through those, please. And
Great.
again, this is a first read, so we can come back for a second.
Thank you. The next two items are actually appendices for current policies that are already in place. Ironically, Dr. Oren helped us through some of this learning experience when he asked us to reevaluate a specific article that was available to our students through one of our databases. In the policy as it currently reads, there is a form to complete. However, there was no form to complete. So now we have a form that accompanies that policy. And in addition, that policy also talks about the ad hoc committee coming together to review and analyze the request. And there is a report that the ad hoc committee completes and submits to the superintendent for final response. There was no report template as well for the ad hoc committee to complete. So now these two appendices will be attached to those policies so that for further implementation and response if we need to use it.
And just to be clear on this one, I know we've talked about that, but for the benefit of the larger board, this is separate and apart. This is nothing to do with, let's say, an opt-out policy. for an individual if a parent questions or does not want their child to participate in a lesson plan or a topic or a discussion. This is a separate request or evaluation, right?
Correct.
And so I know we talked about, and Lisa, you brought up some good points in the meeting when we were talking about opting out. And that, of course, when you invite sort of that in and you formalize it, you could be opening up a can of worms in terms of, people wanting to opt out of, let's say, state required testing or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Is there any formalized sort of, opt out process or any formalized process by which parents would go ahead and petition the school in any way? I guess our last discussion led me to believe that there wasn't, but I just want to just make sure, be clear, and sort of hash it out.
Sure, there are certain things, again, by statute that a parent can request an opt-out for a child. And I see Mr. Doak shaking his head. Could you enlighten us, please? I believe
Only because I've dealt with this policy a few times as principal. Before the start of the school year, parents can opt out. I believe it's just very limited topics such as dissection, which we don't do in the middle school. And then there's some family planning topics as well that parents can opt out of. But those are there is a policy, and the topics are definitely, it's curricular exemption policy. I'd have to look up the number.
And what do you do in the cases in which, let's say, it doesn't meet that, let's say, limited list of topics, lessons, etc., that are that parents have the ability to opt out? What if that is not one of the areas? What happens in that sort of process?
Typically, it's what we do with any time a parent has a question. They contact the teacher. In our situation, it's usually the health teacher who sits and meets with the parents and addresses their concerns. But the students do, if it's not one of those topics, the students do participate in the approved curriculum.
I guess the only thing I would add, and I think I added it at the policy committee meeting, is if a parent is uncomfortable with something that's going on in a class and has a concern, that it is important to contact the teacher. Curriculum instructional leaders also work with curriculum. We wish to know because, look, we're not in the business of making students feel uncomfortable. And there are situations where, and I see the principal shaking their heads, that perhaps in working with the family, something, oftentimes we promote choice on the way certain tasks are done, things like that. And we try to work through those concerns with families. But by the letter of the law and the policy, it is pretty strict. Dr. Henkel, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Just that what I reiterated in the policy committee as well is that technically there is no opt-out language by law, especially when it comes to certain aspects of testing that are mandated. We are required by law to offer tests, for example. That's probably where you hear that language the most. And also by law, we are required to implement and design curriculum based on the standards that the state sets for us. Those slim topics and concerns regarding experiences related to testing or curriculum are always preceded by a conversation. We're always very proactive in having dialogue with parents to truly understand the concerns so we can alleviate those and we can ensure, as Lisa said, students have positive experiences in any of those environments. And we've done that since I arrived here last year, and I know in Weston we do that regularly.
Moving right along. Oh.
Good.
Thank you. The next, may I continue? The next is review and discussion of policy 5136 as it relates to the use of private technology. I'd like to clarify a few reasons why we put this on the board agenda. One of the reasons is, quite frankly, it came up in public comment. We have received some emails of parents wishing to express their opinion, not only on cell phone issue, but on social media, technology, and things like that. So the purpose of putting it on tonight isn't, quite frankly, to enter into a full-blown discussion on policy 5136, which was revised last year, but to make sure that everyone is aware of the policy and what is in the policy. And also to hear from the principals, and it was attached, and it kind of reminds me of one of the comments earlier in public comment. You know, you have policies, and then it's the implementation, right? And so how it looks and is the actions that are taken to follow the policy in schools. So the plan is to have each school kind of review what's in, and I know you have a copy of their handbook, and to discuss like how is this, the way we are following this policy, meeting the needs as you see in the schools, and any concerns you have, principals, and then we can certainly open it up so you can ask questions. Yeah, I do want to note something that the Durgay principals meet, superintendents meet quite often, and last Friday, this was one of the topics. And we talked specifically about, there were several articles that were shared on it. I think part of this also is reading, I guess I would say, opposing views on the topics to kind of better educate ourselves. You know, there are certain things that have come out. I want to thank Principal Ward. She shared a recent research study. I have one that I didn't get a chance to share out, that it's in the email drafts waiting for you tomorrow. Principals, we did talk about it at our leadership team to kind of get a sense, first of all, of what's going on and how we are working with this policy, and sort of some of the things that have been amidst, if you will. I know that some neighboring districts are looking to have some presentations on that, both in the fall and in the spring and the early fall, on the issue of social media and cell phones. And when I have more details, I can certainly send that out. I know the New Canaan community is bringing someone in. And so, of course, the 3 Ws, Wilton, Weston, and Westport, at the meeting said, oh, we would be interested in exploring those possibilities as well, to provide people with support and some background knowledge. So I'll stop at this point to just say that when we reviewed the policy, and jump in, Mr. DeVito, if you remember, or Dr. Henkel, when we reviewed it last March, I believe that the big change that we were adding to the policy, it had to do with the privately owned technological devices, correct, Dan?
Specifically the wearable technology, so Apple Watches and stuff like that. That's why, one of the reasons why we brought it in there, because more and more students are coming in with Apple Watches, and those are very powerful devices, so they were becoming a bit of a distraction in the classrooms. We needed to address it appropriately.
So it kind of captures that technology within the policy. Perhaps we could start in the back and go through with the principals, if you can give us a succinct overview and any feedback of how this policy is being implemented, beginning with Mrs. Kadis.
Yes, we'll start with the youngest learners. So we really don't have very much personal electronic use at the early elementary years because of the age of the students. The technology they use in school is at very defined times with equipment that we give them. We have very few students bring in or try to bring in personal devices. It's rare. And for some reason, a student does have a device, a phone, again, which is extremely rare, or a smartwatch that is distracting them in the classroom. The teachers direct them to put it in their backpacks, and that's where it remains for the instructional day. But again, we have very few, if any, incidents with devices at our age. Yes.
The intermediate
We'd like to
school,
keep it
I
that
think,
way.
is the area where as students are
Yep.
growing, what do we say? Growing and thriving, like it said on the plant. And that's where you see more
Right, so we've had the cell phones, we have electronic devices and cell phone, it's part of our handbook. And we've always put in cell phones, electronic devices. Last year, we had a big discussion about the watches. So we added that into our handbook. And our handbook basically says cell phones, smartwatches, portable music players, and electronic games. All of that is not allowed in the school day at the intermediate school for a couple of reasons. Obviously, they're a distraction to learning, but if they get stolen or broken, kids get really upset. So we've just eliminated that. We ask that if they do bring a phone or a smartwatch into school, it stays in their backpacks, and then they can retrieve it after school. And they've been really, really good about following those rules. We really don't have much problems. And if they do bring it a second time, it sort of finds its way into my office, and they can have it at the end of the day. But the kids have been really, really good about following that rule for our school.
So at the middle school, while the policy is very similar, the practice is a little different. Our kids try to skirt the rules a little bit. We tell them they can't have the devices from 7:45 until 2:30. That's our school day. We're a little more flexible when the kids come in the morning. Some kids get dropped off at 7:10, 7:15, and they are allowed to use their devices at that time. But once the school day starts, we ask that they have them turned off, preferably in their locker. And as with the intermediate school, if their devices are being used or if they're seen, whether it's their phones, their watches, their earbuds, their AirPods, they are taken and brought to the office. The second offense, we do ask the parents to come in and retrieve them. I think the biggest difference for us is the amount of education that we spend both with parents and with students. Helen Knudsen, our library media specialist, just had 4 sessions with students on internet safety, social media, texting, chatting safely online, and just trying to prepare students for how to use these devices when they're out in the world and how to use them in a safe way. We also recently did another coffee with our counselors. Our 3 school counselors had a session last Wednesday on raising screenagers, teenagers in the age of in the digital age. So it's constant education, it's constant reminders, and it is constant consequences as well for the students who aren't able to live up to our expectations.
Dan, would you say, I mean, I remember being principal at both secondary levels. If you were going to give a ballpark number of the amount of times parents have to come in to get the cell phones?
It would,
on a daily basis, on a weekly basis?
Not quite daily, but I would say
monthly?
we probably get 4 to 6 devices a day turned in.
And some of them are first offenses?
Yes.
And these are all documented, I believe,
yes,
right, in the
yep.
logs? So we kind of have a sense
That's how we know
if you know it's a first or a second.
first offense, second offense, third offense. And I would say probably sometimes it's a certain number of, it's just a few students who are the frequent flyers. And it's not uncommon for those parents to say to either me or to Mr. Walters, could you just keep it for maybe 2 weeks or maybe the rest of the month? Because sometimes the parents are seeing some of the same challenges at home.
High school.
So similarly to the middle school and all schools, although we're raising them to be responsible digital citizens, our policies are a little different, our prior school practices. So at the beginning of the year, we had class meetings, and during those class meetings, I informed all of the students at the high school that this was their one official warning about our new practices and cell phone use in the building, because we were hearing that it was a pretty significant distraction to the classroom environment. So I informed all the students with an audible response from the crowd that this was their warning, and anytime a teacher were to see a phone out in a classroom, that the teacher would be taking it, because this was their one generalized warning. So our expectation as a high school was that phones were either in the cell phone pocket in the classroom or in their backpack. understanding that we have students from 9 to 12 and they're all aging into their maturity and responsibility, we also allowed teachers to set those practices. So if you walk into a 9th grade classroom, you'll see cell phones for the most part in the pockets. If you walked into an upper, 11th or 12th grade classroom, you may not see the phones in the pockets, but you certainly are not going to see them out on the desk either. They're stored away in the backpacks. So the first offense, the phone is confiscated by the teacher, and the student picks up the phone in the office at the end of the day. The second time, phone is confiscated by the teacher. Parent picks up the phone from the main office. Third offense, which I don't actually believe we've had a third offense, students must check their phone into the main office at the start of the day, and they can check it once at lunch for 5 school days. And we do a referral to the school counselor, so the school counselor can support them with any concerns around cell phone addiction. The fourth offense would be, you've had 3 opportunities. So the fourth offense, the student must check their phone into the main office at the start of the day. They can check it once daily at lunch because we understand high school, they need to communicate. They have after-school activities. They might have to make arrangements with family members, et cetera. And that they would check in for 20 school days. So the student, again, there was pretty significant audible gasp from the crowd when we informed them of this. And we continue to support that student with their school counselor. Again, I don't believe we've had a third or fourth offense. We've had about 75 referrals. I'm not going to say that there's 75 individual referrals because, as Dan mentioned, we have some repeat offenders. But really walking into classrooms, you do not see cell phones out on desks and a distraction to the educational environment, which I think is a kudos to our kids and our teachers for their attention.
No. Sorry, I'm in.
You can share it later with me if you want to put it in an email. Okay? I don't want to shut you down, but yeah. But I'd be interested in hearing what you have to say. I don't know if anyone has any questions, comments, discussion. I think that this is an intro. We're not just saying, okay, we're done. I think we have some work to do with looking at this.
You set this up by saying, it's not necessarily jump into a full-blown discussion, which I totally appreciate, especially given that we're at, 8:30 or whatever the time is. At the same time, I've been able to sit through in the curriculum committee, which has been great, 4 consecutive different walkthroughs when we examined learning and technology and digital learning in the classroom, which has been great at each level, Pearl, Butt, West, all the way up. And we just finished our last one. And at that curriculum committee meeting, I brought up the question. I was saying, you can't really talk about digital learning without also bringing up the elephant in the room, which is these personal devices. But I said very clearly, is this the forum to do that or not? So the question would be, I do have a bunch of follow-up questions. Actually, I don't know where else to bring them, actually, because they don't fit in curriculum committee. We've not put them in policy. And one of my just sort of initial questions is, I thought I was sort of carrying this concern myself, but I've heard lots and lots of people, including in emails and public comment. So why not just ban the devices on campus?
I'll step in. I think for one of the very reasons that Megan said, what we're doing works, and I get very concerned when we just out and out ban because there is a vocal group that is concerned. And we have situations, especially at the high school, in the upper secondary, where kids stay after school. They don't get picked up sometimes till 10 o'clock at night. If I were a parent, I would not be comfortable without my child being able to have his or her cell phone to reach out. I think what we're saying, you say ban, then it turns into, well, what does ban mean? How do you ban? You can't bring a cell phone into the building. You can't bring a cell phone into the building from 7:30 to 2:30, no cell phones. Okay, if we don't, not lunch, can't come out. But you can have it after school because you'll need it. So go home on a bus, get your cell phone, how are you going to get back? There are so many logistical things that's what makes me uncomfortable when we say ban cell phones on campus. Well, sure. Because there are a lot of layers to this where, how do you deal with that? Yeah. I think Mr. Doak wants to say something, and then please come back to you.
I was just going to say, I think it's very nuanced, even with the policy we have. You have individual exceptions. Sometimes we have students with medical conditions that have devices that they wear to track a variety of things. So it's nuanced. I think, as the superintendent said, we have a policy that works. We also are using it to help teach students, in terms of the appropriate time to use it, before school, after school, and providing options also. It's amazing how we get to teach students who've never used a landline before that the piece that you speak into, you don't have to hold it like this and talk to it like this. It actually goes like this. So it's interesting.
Well, Lisa, I would be one of those parents saying, like, my kid needs a phone, but that's not actually a choice we have to make, because there are phones that remove a lot of the functionality which is so toxic, which is connection to social media, connection to the internet, in which you can do all the basics of texting, calling, communication, etc. So
like
it doesn't
those dumb
need to be an
phones, I
either or.
believe they call.
Yeah, exactly.
Except, and I think that's what one of our guests want to say. We have children, for example, and I'll say it, they're diabetics in my family. They need that phone. They need to be able to look at that phone for medical conditions and medical apps. You have kids that are going to be going to college. They need to be able to look at their phone and look at levels and do different things like that and know what's going on. And I think we need to be really cautious if we just say we're going to ban them, or we're going to say everybody, you can only use what I heard the new term is a dumb phone. It sounds like an old phone, old version of a phone. I think that we need to be really careful about that, to just out and out say no. And that's why, quite frankly, I think a lot of this is looking at the opposing views, understanding the research, seeing if there are other things that we can put in place to better manage these. But I just get very cautious over bans. But what other questions? I mean, I think now's the time. We certainly have some time to spend on going through some of this. And if we need to bring it back and go over some other things, that's fine as well.
I would actually love to see the research supporting smartphones in the schools, to see, because everything that I've read so far is in Chad's camp, which is there's a negative impact on test scores by having smartphones in the school. Of course, we've been talking a long time for the social emotional issues that kids face because of smartphones in the school. So I would really be interested to see what the opposing view is on that, because I do think that, there's clearly been an outreach from members of the community. And I'm with you, Lisa. I don't want to do knee-jerk reactions for a small group of parents by any stretch of imagination. But when we're seeing it on a national stage becoming a real issue, I think that we can't just say that that's going to be a knee-jerk reaction. I think we need to discuss it. We need to figure out what's going to be best for the district and for our children.
Exactly.
And find out, maybe it's not an all-out ban. Maybe it's, dumb phones. That just seems so silly to call them that. But maybe it's a dumb phone, up until a certain grade when there's an emotional maturity to deal with smartphones. Maybe, I don't know, but I think that we definitely have to talk about it and address it as a group.
I think we do, but one thing I want to add, and then I'll turn it back. I think one thing we have to understand, and I'm going to ask the principals to comment, because I don't want it just to be sort of how I believe, the issues that we have with mean behavior, cruel behavior between students, and the impact of whatever different apps, I'm going to show my age, it is not necessarily and most likely not happening during school. It is happening at home, where parents call, they come in, we see things that have happened outside of school hours, and it's right with us. Kids in middle school are not doing that during class. It's happening outside of school, but then they're calling the principal the next day, parents, to help us provide a safe and healthy environment for that child when the activities took place outside of school. And that happens, quite frankly, continuously. And it's a problem.
And I also want to bring up, too, when we look at the studies that show outright bans, that's versus schools who don't have any policies in place like we currently have, where it's the students are supposed to have their phones away during instructional time. So when you're seeing the positives, which we all see, we all know, is there. Again, what is it compared to? So we have to be cognizant and aware of the research that shows it based on what is it compared to? What is the control in that research? So I'm not for or against. I'm just saying we have to be aware that these decisions aren't made in a vacuum. All right, and I will also say as another thing, as a communication tool, if there was a decision to completely ban cell phones, then I would hope we grew up in high school and middle school with a bank of payphones when I needed to call my mom because I was staying late for after school math. How would we now address that? And I'm not saying that to be difficult. I'm being very honest with having a child in middle school myself who decides to text me at 1:59 p.m. that I have to pick him up now because he wants to stay late for school. But if there's no way to communicate, and you can't say just go to the main office and use one of the phones in the main office because those phones are always being used. So now you'd have a line. So these are the dominoes that would fall if there was a decision to outwardly ban cell phones.
I don't disagree, but I think that we can address that too. I think
Just
that
to
there are
jump in there for a
solutions.
second, though, we jumped over the whole dumb phone idea, meaning that one task, calling or texting, that doesn't need to be something that we put into this because that makes things much more challenging. But there are phones that have the functionality. So perhaps what we could be talking about, which people are asking about, is not a ban on cell phones, but a ban on smart devices. Kids could have dumb phones.
I think that we have to understand the problem that we're solving. And I read the emails we received, and I look at the problem that we're being asked to solve as a non-educational problem. We're being asked to solve a problem of, I think, students using cell phones, Snapchat, Facebook, things that are not directly related to curriculum. Separately, I know where you stand on the use of screen time. So I think that there's two separate conversations to be had. One, which Chad has been a very vocal advocate of, which is limiting how much screen time we use for instructional purposes. But when I look singularly at the vocal minority of emails that we got, I look at it as parents saying, we, the district, the administration, the teachers, whomever, are tacitly allowing students to participate in social media by allowing the phones to come into the school. And there are apps that you can put on your smartphone as a parent that prevents your child from using Snapchat during 8:30 to 2:30, 8:30 to 3:30, whenever you choose. So I think the real question for us is we should be first understanding the problem we're trying to solve. I think the emails that we received are more along the lines of the district is allowing students to use smartphones. I think based on the principles laying out when it's permissible, that's just simply not the case. Right. And I think maybe what we need to do is to memorialize or send out an email to the parents of each of the 4 schools. This is when your child's in Hurlbut, your child is not allowed to bring a phone to school. At WIS, your child is allowed to only use it during this time. So I think really what it comes down to is parents can put apps on their phones to prevent their kids from using the objectionable apps when they're in school time.
Or when they're not in school.
Well,
Because
right.
we really work hard to keep the kids off them. I think Ms. Canetta would like to say something too.
Well, we have kids with us for 6 3/4 hours a day, where we have regulations, we have rules, we enforce them, the teachers enforce them. We're monitoring this during assessment. I've had lots of conversations with families. I send a week ahead letter out on Sundays. Often they're with tips and tricks. I think it's an international movement, the Wait Until 8th program. There are lots of programs out there. I admittedly tried to wait until 8th with my own children, but for our own personal family needs, they needed to have cell phones. And I think that the greater issue that we're seeing is the concern is over the amount of time that students are spending on social media and on their phones, right? The scrolling, scrolling, scrolling. And they can all fall victim. I am raising 2 teenagers that, if left to their own devices, and they have been at times, if that cell phone does not get plugged into a certain outlet in our house, it winds up in a bed and they scroll and scroll. And we have to have that conversation of, why are we so tired this morning? What healthy behaviors can we employ, and all of that, and making the kids part of the solution, right? And kind of say, we woke up tired. And those are the kinds of conversations we would love for families to be having, because we do feel like as a school we are regulating that use and that access. I will also say, anecdotally, I am so happy to see the conversations flowing in our cafeteria without the influence of those devices, more than I did pre-COVID. So I just want to kind of anecdotally provide some observations and answers. I don't know that it's access to the social media or personal devices during the school day. I think that the kids are really getting into these scrolling habits after the school day ends. And we understand that, teenagers also, in my case, teenagers have more free time maybe, and more unmonitored free time after school. And that's where that data, and I think that research, and anyone can correct me if I'm wrong, it's not about schools. I would just wonder if it's about the total time that kids are spending on their devices.
To jump in on David's point, yes, some of the emails were that, but if you listen to public comment and read through some of the emails, it's not just about social. They brought up points about attention span. And in fact, there's studies that even having a phone in your pocket or on your desk actually makes people less attentive because they're thinking about the devices. So there's enough problems here to try to tackle a lot of them, but let's make sure we're not creating problems where it's not. You could have a smart device ban, but not a cell phone ban. So the communication aspect, that could be removed from the equation. As could the health one, we could do a simple carve up for that as well. If it's for a medical reason, of course.
Proposal?
The governor is proposing something about cell phone bans.
No, he's not, no, isn't the governor's proposal not a ban, but when you come to school at the beginning of the day, you store your cell phone?
Yes, and storing cell phones also costs, quite frankly, districts tens of thousands of dollars. I do not want to spend our funds on buying those bags or mini lockers or putting in something else. I think we have to be very careful here to think about what problem we're solving in school, and finding ways also through looking at research as well as ways to help young adolescents understand things like the detriments of so much screen time, with different, whether it be programs, looking at the things that we do, especially as they are, one of the concerns as they're leaving Weston. We heard a few years ago, and I think COVID brought it on, students getting depressed, students going to college and not even knowing how to talk to their next door neighbor in college and reaching out to their old friends. That's not what we want. So by tightening up parameters within school, providing more support for them to understand the why behind it. Our kids are really smart, and they can understand the why behind it. And that's where I think we need to spend some time. But again, I get very concerned about, well, we're going to ban this, or we're going to only require this, or we're going to only require that. And there are people that need certain types of devices, and then it becomes the exception. And he has it, oh, he's a diabetic, he needs to check his numbers. Oh, and the teacher's using it. Well, why is the teacher doing it? And then I can't. There are so many unintended consequences. We just need to be careful about how we move forward with any kind of initiative along those lines. There is an issue, an epidemic going on, but it's a societal issue. And until we internationally, globally, get our hands on this, we're going to be swimming upstream right within our school. I mean, I know it. I see it. I see the problems that come in from the use outside the schools.
We can't control the people's time outside school.
But it comes in the school all the time.
Sure, but we could control what people do in the student in the school. I mean, we could.
But you're
we could-
hearing they're not using them. We have them put them away. We're trying to enforce that.
Can I
So
recommend?
I don't, I'm having it's hard for me to understand when I'm in and out of the schools and the principals and the teachers are there, that I think that there are places where it's running rampant. And I worry at a national and a state level when it comes into our local school district and using that perspective to initiate a drastic change.
Can I
I
recommend?
think we need to think it through carefully.
I was going to say, can I just recommend, I think it would be great if each of the principals sent out a blast to their community with when it's permissible.
Yes.
And because I think that's a question mark, I didn't have that information. So when I saw how it was broken out, I read the electronic the policy, but I didn't know when it was permissible. And so I think first, if we let parents know it is never permissible at Hurlbut, that's a good starting point, where it's permissible at WIS. And to Megan's credit, again, my portrait of graduate, one of the students that I saw, actually made mention of the rule that you put in place, I guess, this year. I don't know what was in the past, and that putting the cell phone in that pocket was beneficial to them. So what I'm saying is I feel like where it is permissible, there's also rules. So I think it would be really helpful to let parents know at each grade level when a student can use, have a smartphone, and then we can figure out from there, based on the feedback we get, where is the real issue. And I think that what we're going to find is on the bus and at home. And then maybe what we can do is from an educational perspective, because it is an epidemic. I remember, again, portrait of the graduate, I left my cell phone in the car. And when I first got, when I first got to the classroom, I'm like, crap, where's my cell phone? And I left to go get it, and I got halfway down the hall, and I'm like, screw it, it can stay in the car. And I went back to the portrait of the graduate without my cell phone. So, point being is I think that we do have a problem, and perhaps what we can do is make it part of our education for students to help them identify when there's too much screen time. So I think it'd be great to at least get out when it's permissible.
Sure, we can certainly send that out. I think that's a great suggestion, to get that out. And I think it's a district distribution. Like, it's fine that, the Hurlbut families get it, and so now Mr. Guido knows there's no cell phone use at Hurlbut. But I think those parents...
Smartphone use, not cell phone use, right? Smartphone use? No, it's an important distinction. No, truly, because multiple people have said, but you have to be able to communicate. So you could have cell phones, i.e. dumb phones, but not smart devices. Just want to clarify.
What we're saying here is that there are no, however it's worked, we don't say that they can use dumb phones. That's not part of the policy. But I think in sending out the plans, and we do not distinguish between the two in the policy, I think that everyone needs to know the trajectory, is my point. Okay, this is what happens just in WIS, in a bubble. It's important for the district families to know the trajectory of what we're doing first.
To circle back to what Sharon brought up, what data are we using? Meaning, I hear you saying, Lisa, it makes me very nervous to make these sort of shifts, but the data about smartphones, not cell phones, smartphones, it's pretty stark. And all of the reasons I'm hearing us not try to, as the public comment person said a couple weeks ago, be brave with this, they seem to me to be all very solvable problems. So I'm wondering if this is not the forum to do that, to consider how we're trying to protect our kids. I don't know where we would. I mean, the year and a half, let me just finish one point. The year and a half I've been on the board, I've had the biggest comments I've ever gotten are on safety, on test scores, on screen time, on screens and devices, and on mental health. And phone use, and I know we're trying to distinction between what happens after school and what happens in school.
Yeah, it's after school.
But phones have connections to almost all of them, and if you consider self-harm in the conversation about safety, it connects there as well. Now, I recognize we can't control what people do after 3 o'clock, but you're right about the bus. And you could do the communication task you're talking about. You could address the things that the public has been asking about for the last 6 weeks. And all I'm suggesting is right now, what is the data we're using to say that the policy we're currently in is the best one?
The data we're using is our local data based on how we are enforcing this policy. We do not have students spending 5, 6, 7 hours in school on cell phones on screens. So I guess I would wonder, do the benefits of doing an out-and-out ban or in requiring people to buy dumb phones to communicate with their children is creating an issue that we do not have in school, and that the bigger issue of the amount of screen time takes place outside of school, and that's where we need to, I think, do a better job helping the community, although to your point, we're in charge of education. Each family is in charge of his or her own child. But there are programs, we've done different programs, there are increased programs. I was just looking at a presentation today online from, who was it? It was a person that New Canaan is using, where they're talking about, the man's talking about to kids, why are you doing this streak? You know, have you heard this? Is it,
Max
what is it?
Stossel.
What
Max
is-
Stossel
Yeah.
from Social Awakening. It's a streak in
But
Snapchat.
we don't know if that's the one we're going to use. But the
Okay,
point is,
that's
we're
what he was
looking at
talking
different ones. And about streaking, correct? Isn't that one of the things? Like, or streaking is something about keeping it on constantly, never shutting it off. How do you do this? And that's one of the things that this presenter talks specifically about to students about, like, why are you doing this? I mean, there were some great clips. Those are the kinds of things, I think, that we could do a better job with in school. And,
We
yeah,
had a
that gentleman
presentation-
is out,
oh,
but.
go ahead. Sorry, go ahead. We had a presentation last year about test scores. I was so thrilled to see the district improvement plan last year. There's research now. I'll share the article with you based on some stuff from Jonathan Haidt I read about in the Atlantic, but it's been circulated widely, that test scores are actually negatively impacted by too much smartphone use. Now, I would be so bold as to say, it's not as though we don't have a problem here and the problem is only at home. It may be bigger at home, but if we're getting, as Dan said, 4 to 6 devices turned in a day, if people are at drop-off from 7:10 to whenever, they're basically allowed to be on their smart devices. Okay, it might be tremendously minimal compared to what's out there, but I would still say, why not consider what we could do to change that, to improve that? I still don't hear anything that addresses the stuff that the public has asked us about in terms of attention span, in terms of decreasing natural curiosity and exploration, like
But Chad,
the one from before asked.
It's almost never permissible. I mean, I might be overgeneralizing, but it's almost never permissible to use your personal smart device during instructional time anywhere in Weston Public Schools. I mean, principals, did I overgeneralize, or that's?
No, that's what they said.
That is correct. I would also say, in terms of that personal curiosity, we are doing curriculum work, right, which is the work of schools, to look at how our curriculum is designed, the use of essential questions to spark creativity and curiosity, and that's all in the work that we're doing towards our curriculum. So I'm trying to understand the problem that we're trying to solve, because I think, and again, I don't know what that data is necessarily related to. I haven't read that study, but in watching and observing teenagers, and again, observing my own and their friends when they come over to study, there's a cell phone next to them, and sometimes that's used for good and creative purposes in the work that they're doing. Often it is a distraction to studying, which is happening outside of the school day. If students are in a learning strategies or a structured study class at the high school or in an English or math class, those phones are away. And in learning strategies and our structured study classes, we're having those conversations about that distractibility. I think that attention spans have been part of the conversation for decades, certainly as long as I've been in education, kind of equating the attention span of a child to their age, right? So we're conscious of that. I think it's also a part of adult learning theory too, in terms of how long adults can pay attention in these days. And our instruction is reflecting that work and those studies too. So I'm just going to, again, push back a little and just wonder what the problem is we're trying to solve in our school day, and how much of that is something that, one, we can really control, and two, I've been working with teenagers for 20 years of my career, and those distractions are happening outside of the school day, and social media, that presence does infiltrate the school day, because then we are asked to get involved and do investigations. And I would say probably 8 to 9 times out of 10, there are things that happen outside of the school day that we're investigating.
A question would be, what would the district need to see to consider revising this policy? Meaning, as it is right now, personal devices are allowed at WIS, but they're not allowed to be out, but kids are allowed to have them. At Hurlbut, yeah.
No, but they don't. They're not allowed. They don't have them.
But I'm just going off the policy in the policy shared in the agenda. What would the district need to see in terms of data or evidence to consider putting in place a ban on smart devices, but not cell phones?
Not to, the principal said it's not an issue. To a person, it's not an issue, and they're not used during the school day. Isn't this an issue? I mean, you were talking about this program, New Canaan, with.
Yeah, I do
Isn't this an
think,
issue of-
we need to do some work. I think we need to educate ourselves on different things,
Isn't
however.
this a question of educating the parent?
Yeah. I think
More
there's an
so-
educational component,
Right,
yes.
and if we're going to engage with a consultant like you described, isn't this something that the community should be invited to?
Yes, in that town, it's the community effort. And there's one thing I want to say, and we spend a lot of time talking about safety and security of children. And when I was in the intermediate school, one of the reasons that the parents, right, they have the smartwatches or the cell phones for after school is they can also track where their children are. I am not at a point where I would take that right away from a parent by saying that he or she could not have that type of a device for his or her student. I think you are opening, you talk about a safety issue. I mean, Patty, can you add, isn't that one of the reasons why, especially in like 4th and 5th grade, kids have these?
Especially for after school?
Yes.
And we've also had, parents want to make sure their child is safe. So we always say, let's put everything into the backpack during the school day. If you have to reach your child, you call the school, we can, get in touch with your child and vice versa. But it's after school. And, we talk about phones. There aren't really many phones available to kids after school. Like if the building is closed, how would they make a phone call? And we've had a huge number, or a large increase, I will say, of students who are walking now. Way more than I've ever experienced in the last.
Because of the sidewalks,
of
yes.
the sidewalks now. So, and we've had kids who aren't where they're supposed to be. So the way to find them sometimes is through the phones or
the parents do. I remember having a
right,
conversation
yeah,
with
yeah.
a parent saying that was the purpose for after
Yes,
school.
Yes, right. And we can, certainly, David, to your point about the buses, we can certainly get, tougher on the buses. We talk about, that's an extension of a school day.
Well, we did it last spring. I remember when you were out, I heard there was an issue in the 5th grade.
Yep.
Boys, sorry, 5th grade boys, doing wanting to
Address it.
videotape on the cell phones. I got on my golf cart, went over there, talked to every 5th grade class, said, this is an extension of your day.
Yep.
Every teacher in 5th grade got out there, greeted them as they were getting on the bus. I got on every single bus and said, we don't do this here.
Right.
And that's when I found out a lot about why kids had them. Oh, well, I have it for my mom. I won't do that with it. Or I have this watch, I keep it. And they understood the rules. Few of them didn't. And it was reinforced. So it's how you set the expectation. I really believe that.
I think the problem that we're being asked to solve again is it actually doesn't transcend. It's not a school day issue. It is an after school issue. And it's a serious one. I could tell when my 3rd graders had too much screen time because he becomes hangry. He becomes that really angry kid. And I'm just like, too much screen time. And that's a parent problem. I could use some help on how, because I don't know the answer, I could use some education on how to prevent that. But I think from a starting point, what we should do as a district is let parents know when it's permissible for a student to use an electronic device. At Hurlbut, never during instructional day. WIS, never during instructional day. Middle school seems to be kind of a never with the couple of caveats. And from what Megan says and the feedback that I've received, you've got a really good handle on it at the high school. So I think we start with that. And then maybe what we do is we look at, can we extend that onto the school bus, which I imagine we can, because the school bus is under our purview. So maybe what we do is we further define it so that it is not permissible to use your cell phone on the school bus with the exception of.
There's no enforcement for that.
Well, right,
Yeah,
but
the
there's
drivers would have to have
Right, but there's
like,
difference
eyeing in the
between-
rearview mirror. I mean,
Right.
There are
well,
videos
hang
on school buses.
Right. But there's a difference between not saying it because it's not enforceable and saying it and having struggles to enforce it. So, for example, if a student today, if uses Snapchat and whatever on the school bus, and the receiving student reports it to the district, if it happened during school bus time, it's enforceable. No, I'm not expecting the driver to keep their eyes up on the mirror, but we can still incorporate it into a policy. Huh? No, I'm getting some looks.
I said snitches get stitches. They're not going to do that.
Fair enough.
So,
And then we can educate parents, and Dan, I think, has done some parent education one-off on like content filtering and accessing websites and stuff like that. Maybe what we can do is offer programs where Dan can show parents how to block Snapchat from 8:30 a.m. to 8:29 a.m. the next day. I mean, there's tools out there that maybe parents aren't aware of.
Yeah, and I had gone over that. I had a webinar last year, and I had a lot of parents, so over 100 parents came by, and gave them exactly that, tools on how to block social media in general, how to use the parent mode with iPhones, with Androids, how to do school time with watches, all those different types of things. And every year more stuff comes out, including, even paid products to really help lock down devices for children. So, I've spoken to this to Lisa before. Last year was one of a series, so I can continue having these conversations and help empower parents, because we all feel kind of helpless. Even in IT, we feel helpless when our kids become potatoes because they're on their devices too much. So how can we all work together, and what can we do?
I mean, it is a real problem. I just want to make sure that we are solving a problem that we are intended to solve.
And to partner with the PTOs and different groups that always help support, like I said, we've been vetting, screening, programs, a speaker, the resources that come with that, parent audience, student audience, all of that. We would welcome that support because, we need to support families. Kids on cell phones till 1 o'clock in the morning and then having to be at school, it's not good.
I think we're good on this. My last comments is I thank the principals for reemphasizing their vigilance. I think what the action item for the meeting notes is to work with the parents closely, because I think the principals have already shown that, and Dan has, and I think that's where we double down. I'll just end on one factoid, because we like this favorite number now. How many hours do kids K through 12 spend in school?
Okay, Peter, I don't have that presentation.
16,000.
Right.
How many hours do they spend out of school? 104,000. So I think the problem may be the 104,000 that we need to help the parents with. I think we'll move on to the next agenda item.
well, hold on. I will see that. I will stop talking, I promise. But I do not think the subject actually is like we're good on this agenda point. My biggest concern is I feel like the decisions we're making seem to be based on feelings, instincts, things like that, and honestly, like a lack of interest in making some bold steps with it. So my question is simply, like, what would need to change in order to follow some of the requests we're getting in terms of this one explicitly to reconsider Board of Ed Policy 5136?
I mean, I would say that I think this discussion has been it's kind of we want to make sure that we sort of have a healthy approach and a sense of a balanced approach when we look at these issues. I don't think it's based solely on feelings. We have logs where we record all of these, if you will, offenses. I don't like that word. Quantifying it, looking at, as they said, repeat offenders. I don't like that word either. But it's not just based on feelings. I think it's based on understanding what we are doing now with the national things, the Atlantic article, the other article that Ms. Canetta is sharing, looking at that, and we have quantitative data on how many students are violating this. That's not feelings.
I meant the quantitative data about, is our phones a problem in our schools or not? And would a cell phone ban be a net positive or net negative for the district? Smartphone ban, not cell phone
The
ban.
educators are saying it's not an issue.
Well,
The people in the buildings are saying,
It would be interesting to gather some further data. I have no problem doing that.
yeah, I should
I
reverse
think
and
we
ask
need
it.
to talk
So
again
to a
as an
person,
administrative team.
all four of you agree that cell phone use during the day is not a capital P problem. Is that accurate?
Not a problem at Hurlbut.
It's not a problem. I would say, do we have people that violate the cell phone policy? Yes. Do we have students that violate all of our policies? Yes, and we deal with that. It's middle school. It's the kids are acting like middle school students. I don't know that a ban would change their behavior, because I think for all intents and purposes right now, what we have is a ban.
Yeah.
I think it's the conversations with the students, it's conversations with the parents. We've been loose at times in the middle school during COVID, letting kids use their cell phones during lunch. We've tightened that down. There were kids that were using it in the hallway sometimes. We've tightened it down. I think the high school has done the same. We are not seeing disruptions to the educational process due to cell phone use. And I think, for me, that's what I would need to see to think that we needed to change something, and I'm not seeing it.
And I'll just say, we changed things at the high school this year because it was a consistent, reported, really annoying disruption to the classroom. And we were getting that from other students and from teachers, and we responded to that data set. That was not anecdotal. You could walk in and say, what's the rule in here, right? We had cell phone pockets, but were they being utilized? Because we wanted to make sure that we were setting a building-wide expectation. And so we wanted teachers to feel supported in that building-wide expectation. So I was able to say to teachers, everyone got fair warning. I'm the bad guy, right? So we did respond to those behaviors with the current plan that we have in place, which we really feel is working. As I said, we have about 75 infractions. We have some repeats. We have really, really good kids. We have really, really respectful kids. And so some of the national conversation, I spent a year working in a building that the year before I got there, the kids were walking in one-way hallways. That was the rule. Because of the behaviors in the school, you could only walk one way down the hallways in a high school. And I think sometimes that national conversation is more about so many buildings, whether it's a K-2 building or a high school building. And I just think we have to remember the really respectful kids that we have in our schools who really want to do well and want to achieve, and who actually reportedly appreciate the structures that we put in place.
All right, well, that's 4 for 4. That's really useful to hear. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Lisa, you want to?
Thank you. Principals, hang up for one more. I said you could go after this, but I missed a policy. And Dr. Henkel texted me, that's why I looked at my phone, to say that I missed it. 6161, the discussion, please, Dr. Henkel.
Sure, I'll keep it brief. We are always reviewing policies and updating them regularly. The last time this policy was updated was in 1991. So this is a updated policy and regulation regarding instructional texts and educational materials. In the policy committee, we talked about how whenever we make revisions to policies, we do create small group conversations that include teachers, administrators, so that we understand how these policies reflect our current practices, especially when they're as old as 1991. So this policy is now reflective of our current practices that we use when we're making decisions around instructional texts and educational materials, and the accompanying regulations also that provide guidelines and reflective questions when we're making decisions.
Okay? Okay. Principals, thank you very much. Mr. Doak, I'm so sorry. He's my ride home. I can't drive.
Okay, let's go to the next one real quick.
Sure. The next one really quickly, and I had passed it out, is a memorandum of agreement that we wanted to inform you about. It has to do with the board's payout to the HSA and it was requested by, the Finance Department as well as the union, in that the administrators' union was the only union where they were getting a payout in 4 installments, and it kind of adds a burden of making sure that it gets paid out in 4, where the other 2 unions, they paid out the HSA, the board portion, in 2. And so, and this fund also goes over to the town and they pay it, correct? So it kind of involves both finance departments. It's a small group to make the change for. There's no real economic impact, I would say, on the process. It was just something that we wanted to move forward to kind of put everybody on the same. The administrators, if you recall, negotiated first. And so they said, oh, we'll pay it out in 4, but on the town side and on our finance side, it's easier to do everyone twice a year. So I don't believe you have to vote on it. It just has to be signed, but I wanted to bring that out publicly. I don't know if there's any questions.
And Lisa, just so this also, it affects WA, but also affects the unaffiliated.
The unaffiliated, which is right here.
Move on.
Yes, you can move on. Consent agenda, Dr. Rasmussen.
Thank you very much. Just a short consent agenda here. We have, again, I'll start with resignations. We had 2 resignations. William LaPlaca, paraeducator, that was effective last Friday. I'll get into that replacement here in a second. Brianna O'Neill is at the end of this month, speech and language pathologist. We currently have that posted and gathering applications. Sarah Wilstatter, our new hire, as our paraeducator, that's actually taking the place of Mr. LaPlaca, which she started today. She was our building substitute, and we're glad, and she's excited for this new position. Our other new hire is a start in next school year. This is Julia Rusk, who's actually in district currently, actually working as a replacement for a maternity leave. She has her master's in communication disorders from State University of New York, and also her bachelor's in sociology from Franklin and Marshall College in Pennsylvania. And that is our short consent agenda.
Questions? Will someone make a motion?
Move that the Weston Board of Education accept the consent agenda as presented.
And is there a second? Second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Superintendent report. I feel like I've talked a great deal tonight. I just want to encourage everyone to go see Mean Girls at the high school. It's the musical. It should be great. And I'd like to cede my time, is that the correct word, to Dr. Henkel, if you'd like to talk a little bit about our recent professional development. It was highlighted in our last month's update, but it's worth talking about. We've had some great professional development days, and we have one coming up. So maybe you'd like to share a little flavor of that.
Sure. We have been working really hard this school year to gather more data from teachers in the field around aspects of professional learning that they really feel that they request and would like, that's aligned to their roles in the district. We have a district committee that takes all that information into consideration when we're designing our professional development for our teachers. We customize our professional learning by grade level, by content area across the entire district, and we continue to do that work even as we enter the April 2nd full-day professional learning session. We have outside speakers that come in to do work around trauma-informed care. We're having restorative practices. Responsive classroom trainer coming in on April 2nd for HES. And we're focusing a lot on curriculum development, and Megan alluded to it before, but a lot of things around essential questions and standards progressions and understanding how to unpack some of that information so that the engagement level in the classroom is at its highest. We've also been exploring different aspects of artificial intelligence and different tools to help the learning experience, not only for students but also for staff in their planning. And And that's basically it. We have an early dismissal day on the 17th as well, and we're looking at planning for the next school year as well, and thinking about how we make connections from all of our professional development opportunities throughout the school year.
And I know that at the policy committee it came up about the AI policy. I know that both of you on the committee brought that up, and I'm pleased to report that under the direction of Mr. DeVito and Dr. Henkel, who are working on that, and we should have something to bring to you in the spring. Tracy?
Good evening. Just two quick updates to share with you tonight. On February 27th, we had Caitlin Drenzik from the Department of Developmental Services, also known as DDS, join our parent meeting. She provided a comprehensive overview of the steps families need to take to qualify for DDS services, and also talked about the role DDS plays in supporting students with intellectual disabilities and some students on the autism spectrum after they age out of special education services in the public schools. The meeting was well attended, which is always nice. We were able to respond to some parent questions in the moment and also connect families to resources outside of that meeting. The recording of the meeting, as always, is available on the website. And because there was so much information and because DDS is such a complex process, we also set up a folder that has several, I think there's like 12 different attachments of resources for families to access about various steps in the process. That's linked right near the video, thank you, Dan, on the district website. We're in the initial stages of thinking about our April meeting. That's our last parent meeting of the year. I've gotten some feedback that it would be helpful to talk a little bit about extended school year services, so that will either be part or all of that meeting. And then finally, we've been working with families to prepare to support students as they transition between buildings in the upcoming school year. I've shared with all of you that we have a very large cohort of students receiving special education services transitioning from 8th grade to 9th grade in the fall. We offered a parent meeting to support this transition. It was also very well attended. Thanks to Ben Newman, Amy Spicer, and two of our special education teachers, Mike Mafucci and Marcy Ames, who facilitated that conversation. The recording of that meeting is also available for families who could not attend. So exciting work happening in PPS.
Phil?
So just want to give a quick update. Just to point out that between now and the end of the school year, there will be some variability with our end of year balances. We try to best project where we'll end the year. Last month, you'll recall that we had a slight deficit. There's been a change to that, and we will continue to see those kind of fluctuations. But really what's driving, and before I even start, we will see those fluctuations as we have better information. So as information evolves, we'll update the board. So for this month, for the period end in February, we had some savings for salaries, which related to administrative turnover, FML savings, and we are releasing some money for electricity, and that's primarily driven by our virtual net metering plans. You'll recall that in August of 2023, we reached a cap for our credits for virtual net metering. We had some carryover credits from last year, approximately $107,000. So combined with the credits for the period December through June, mid-December through June, we're going to have better than expected credits for the virtual net metering. In addition to that, because we weren't generating, so to speak, from August through mid-December, there wasn't a charge for that generation service. So we will anticipate to have some savings there as well for approximately $112,000. So combined between the credits and the virtual net metering savings for generation, and also trending slightly below budgeted for delivery costs, we anticipate a savings of approximately $185,000 for electricity. And that is it for the month. So we have pretty much a month-over-month savings of our increase of $257,000.
Questions? Can I have a motion to approve the financial report, David?
Move that the Weston Board of Education approve the 8th fiscal year 24 financial report for February 2024 as presented.
Great. Is there a second? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Moving on to the committee reports. Communications Committee, I think we covered that.
Agree.
Thank you for doing that. CABE,
No updates.
Cooperative Educational Services.
Nothing interesting.
Curriculum Committee,
So this past month, we had the fourth of 4 updates, one for each school, on the role of digital literacy and technology, looking at how technology is used in the classroom. And we just finished with the high school, and it's amazing to see all of the scaffolding and building that the students are doing by the time they get to high school, and the amazing things they're doing with it. I think one of the things that shone through all of the presentations was how dedicated our faculty is in those areas, and you can just feel not just the need to keep up on technology, but that drive and that passion for always looking at what's going on and how we can best educate our students for the world that they're going to be working in. So it's a great series to take a look at over the past 4 meetings, if you can check it out.
EOC, Peter?
Certainly, I'll refer to our exciting meeting last Thursday that's recorded because we had a lot of deep dive PowerPoints. But here's the 3 snapshots. I attended the Green School Conference and I gave her a review of that. And Dr. Oren, it's a good time to be a science substitute teacher because it's getting really exciting here with respect to sustainability and the science around that. We had a great presentation from Tecton on the middle school building options, and I think that deep dive really was quite informative, and the decision process is maturing on where to take that. And finally, we have an upcoming meeting, and we're starting to better understand the value offerings of owner's rep as project managers. And I think that's an important piece that we've added to our diligence. And that's a wrap for EOC for tonight.
Finance and Operations, you heard Phil. The only other points to make is Mike Delmastro discussed we're moving into the spring and all the sports that are taking place, and the fields are in order. And then the other item is the town's proposal to take down the annex and have people move elsewhere for some period of time, which is under discussion. Negotiations Committee? I don't believe there's anything there, sorry. Policy Committee, Sharon?
I would just like to say that we had a very busy meeting, and you are all welcome for the 86 of the 93 pages that we provided in this evening's presentation. But yeah, it's just been very busy, and we'll continue to be busy because we've got a lot of policies that we need to continue to update. Dr. Henkel, of course, found a 1994, was it 91? I can't remember. 91 policy. Oh, great. We've got some others that have, like, probably something that referenced Starsky and Hutch or something. I'm not sure. We're all old enough to remember that. But anyway, not you, sorry. Or you, Bernie. Anyway, so yeah, we're going to be updating a lot of policies, and we're going to keep you guys entertained. That's it.
WEF? Sharon?
I would love to say that there's an update, but they had to reschedule their meeting, and it took place tonight, so I don't have an update.
Great. So the next scheduled meeting is April 8th, and it'll be at 7 o'clock, and it'll be remote. Anything else? Have a motion to adjourn? Second? All those in favor? Aye?
Aye.
There we go. Thank you, everybody.